All right. Welcome, Jamie. Welcome to Deep Diving. My name is Benjamin Hadfield. I'm a technical dive instructor as well as a master instructor. And we'll be going through deep diving this evening. What those certifications mean to you is I express that I'm an extended range instructor means I'm qualified to go very, very deep and spend lots of time at that depth, much deeper than what you're certified for. So my wife and I are certified for 175. And to carry up to 6 tanks in one dive. So we're extremely well qualified to teach this class. And I'm a master instructor, which is the second highest level you can be as an open water general instructor. So that's what that means to you. As we kind of go through these classes and you start going through classes with me, I want you to think about where you want your dive journey to go. What does that look like to you? And the answer I always get when I get fairly recent and newer people into my classes, I say, where do you want to go with your dive journey? And they said, I want to see pretty fish on coral reefs. Good to know. Here's the challenge with that is 70% of the earth or 72% of the earth is made up of water. There are lots and lots of coral reefs. There are lots and lots of pretty colorful fish of all flavors, shapes, and sizes. So think a little bit more deeply as you go through this process. I put this slide up. This is a few of the specialties that I can personally teach, all the way from ice diving, advanced wreck diving, search and recovery, altitude, navigation, coral identification, nitrox. If you haven't taken nitrox, it's a good one. By the way, as I've mentioned that, let's see, on the 29th, I do have an altitude class, would be a really good one for you as well. And they have a discounted rate on that one as well. And I have new material in that class as well that's never been taught. So excited. But as you kind of think through this process, think about what you want to go. Caleb, for example, he is, let's see, he is certified for altitude, navigation, science, night and limited viz, deep diving, dive guide, nitrox, perfect buoyancy, full face mask, stress and rescue, and soon to be scuba ranger and a few others. So he's got some good qualifications as well as this is a limited list. I don't have deco diver on there, and there's a few that I don't have on there. I do have it. I've got it under individual, but I've got there's other certifications on here that I can teach. So he's got a bunch of those as well. So
don't forget about snorkeling, man. I was certified in snorkeling.
He's a snorkeling instructor. Let's not put that down. Big deal. Absolutely. And Jamie, as we go through this, you'll see pictures every once in a while of personal photos I took. This was a dive at the crater where you and I will be diving at. So we'll do our confined water portion right here, and then we'll go off into the deep of the crater. Hopefully you have a flashlight. If you don't, I've got a spare one I can lend you. That's not a problem. Caleb will be in the midst of being tortured. He is going to be going through his ITC at that point. Jamie, for me, I do the diver philosophy with the SSI dynamic. And what that means is I'm gonna slam some knowledge into you. I'm gonna help you develop some skills. I'm gonna talk to you about equipment and then experience. Now, the experience for me is a kind of a vague statement. So I want to give you experience in doing what we're doing, but I also feel like I need to give you a good experience. So if you're not having fun, please let me know, and I will endeavor to tell you a dad joke, and make the experience much better. By the way, Nikki just shared a new dad joke with me. Do you want to share? Or do you want me to?
You can.
Okay, where do rainbows go?
I don't know where they go.
They go to Prism, but they get a light sentence.
Nah.
I thought that was a good one. I liked it. So
it's not very often that I get a shared dad joke that he actually laughs at.
That was a good one. I liked it. So as we go through this, I'll try and make the experience fun. I'm not really much of a jokester. I'm reasonably serious and professional, but I'll try my best. As we kind of go through our journey together, you and I, and I'll at some point be handing some of this over to Caleb as well. You'll start training. I'm going to do some water sessions, learn some skills. I'm going to help you increase your confidence, build some conditioned responses. And my goal is to make sure that you are a safe diver, able to autonomously dive with a equal or more skilled buddy in the situations that we're training. In this particular case, is going to be night and limited viz. My expectations for you are going to be log in and do your homework. We're going to do 1 to 3 sessions, depending upon how far we get tonight. We need to do 3 open water dives for this class. Those dives, good news for you is we only have to get past 60 feet. we're going to be diving the crater. So we're going to do a 60-foot dive, and then we're going to do a 60-foot dive. And guess what we're going to do after that?
Same.
A 60-foot dive. You are psychic today. You do have to finish your online homework with an 80% or better. There is a final exam in there. Good news is you can take it as many times as you like, and I will not know. And then finally, I ask that all my students, please, 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 if you think we are awesome, go to Facebook and Google, give us a review, put photos up, tell us we are awesome. If you think we suck, go to Facebook and go to Google and tell us the same. We can't approve if you don't tell us what's wrong, but hopefully you think we're awesome. But all I ask from any of my students, and Caleb has heard this about 1 million times, is all I can ask for you is to be honest with me through the process. So always be honest. If you think we're great, great. If you don't, great. I have thick skin and tough feelings. So, Jamie, what's your expectation of this class?
Just like get comfortable with the more technical aspects and just like being safe, being confident in my abilities. I also need to work on my navigation, I think, at some point. So
Absolutely. I'd be happy to work with you on that as well.
Probably not in the crater.
The crater is going to be tough to do navigation in.
Okay.
It's about a 40-foot round hole that goes 67 feet deep. So it's fairly rough to do navigation in. But I'm sure we can at some point get you into some navigation as well. What's your expectation of me, Jamie?
I remember Caleb asking this, and it's kind of the same. Like, I appreciate humor, being patient. I think the patience is the biggest thing. So
I can do that. Nikki will tell you, and I think Caleb will tell you that I'm very patient, and we'll get you through this. We try and have fun and make it a good experience. So overall, let's talk about this a little bit. So there's several pieces that we need to be aware of: the exposure system, the delivery system, the information system, and the buoyancy system, as well as the accessory system. Now, Jamie, as we start getting deeper, why do you think an exposure system like a wetsuit might be important?
it allows you more versatility in like locations where you can dive, conditions, all designed to protect your body and limit the like negative effects of the environment on your body personally.
Well, let's talk about, we're talking about deep diving. Why do you think an exposure system gets more and more important as we go into deep diving?
With the pressure, the effects that it has on your body. That's like the biggest thing I think of. I guess the temperature also changes, but
I see where you're going with that, but really the pressure doesn't change. So the evident pressure that we feel at 33 feet is the evident pressure we feel at 130 feet. So the pressure on your body is going to feel the same. But one of the interesting things that happens in the ocean is as the light is not able to penetrate deeper, the ocean gets cooler and cooler and cooler, right? It gets colder and colder. For example, in Ryrie, when we dive in the summertime, there's times in August we'll dive and the surface temperature will be 70 degrees. But as Nikki and I get out to that 120-foot mark, the water cools down to about 42 degrees. So even though we're diving nice and warm, where we're diving to that deep point is much colder, right? And we see this in the ocean as well. There's a really great wreck that off the coast of West Palm that's at 175 feet, and it's a nice big wonderful wreck. But it's interesting that you'll dive in and the ocean will be 79 degrees at the surface down to about 50-60 feet, and then it'll thin down to 74 at about 100. But when you get down to the 175-foot mark, you start getting into the undercurrent swells, and that it actually gets down to 52 degrees in the ocean. So as we start doing this, the first thing is we have to deal with thermoclimbs. The second part about that is how fast does water wick body temperature away versus air?
At a faster rate. As I said, I'm thinking of the computers that Caleb had. It cools it down.
25 times faster than air. That's a big number, right?
Yeah.
So, Jamie, you and I decided to go diving in the Mediterranean Sea. Beautiful sea, right? 84-degree water temperature. But unfortunately, we get lost from the boat, and we're out in the water for 5 hours at 84-degree water. Could we get hypothermia?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So as you start going deeper, means that you're probably going to be starting adding time as well. So as we kind of go through this process, I want you to kind of keep this idea that as we go deeper, we add time, but we also deal with colder water. So now we're spending longer times in colder than what we think water. So now all of a sudden the water's not 84 degrees, it's 72 degrees. And we're spending 30 minutes instead of at that temperature instead of at the warmer rate where it's at 50 feet, right? So we need to be aware of that. And that's definitely a key concern to be aware of as we go through this. Let's see, I'm going to remove that real quick. And so as we kind of think about that, think about the idea that you're going to spend longer in the water and you're going to be going deeper as well. Now, as we kind of go through this process and we're starting to go deeper into the water, we need to start thinking about special equipment. Things like lights, dive tables and slates, diver's tools, and spare parts and repair kits. The first thing is, as we start going deeper, are we able to keep the same amount of visual spectrum light as we would at the surface?
No.
No, unfortunately not. There's a couple considerations on that. The first one is we start losing light, right? In Ryrie, if you dive to 65, 75, 85 feet, it's a night dive. You don't see anything unless you have a light, you're screwed. But same thing happens in the ocean. You get to 130 feet and things start getting a little darker. And certainly there's plenty of places where you can still see just fine. But they are dimmer, right? One of my favorite dives is Molokini. 130-foot dive on the backside of Molokini is wonderful, but it has a very poor light penetration because the wall is not like this. It's inverted. So you tend to be slightly under the wall. So you're losing light penetration because of the depth, but you're also losing light penetration because you're in the shadow of the mountain, basically, of the volcanic cone. So that becomes a challenge. So we definitely want to have lights so we can be able to see and we're able to be safe with that. But as we start getting deeper in, we remember Roy G. Biv. At 15 feet, we lose our reds and then our oranges, then our yellows, and so on. So at 60 feet, we've got very little color we can see. And I promise you, even at 130 feet, fish still have color. You just, without light, you won't be able to tell. So you want to see those pretty colors, right? And the banded coral shrimp are one of Nikki and I's favorite things to find. They're beautiful. They're red. They're white. They're beautiful. But if you don't have a light on them and you're at depth, they look gray. And they're kind of right. Nobody wants to deal with a beige fish, right? You want a pretty red fish or a yellow fish or a blue fish, green fish. You want colors, and they have them. Absolutely. So it's one of those things that you definitely want to be a part of. And interestingly enough, all coral is not all the same color as well. So they have something called zooxanthony in them. It's a type of algae. And this type of algae is dependent upon where in the world they are. And as that zooxanthony is absorbed into the coral itself, it gives it a different color. So you can get red corals and blue corals, yellow corals and orange corals. Because of this algae that is absorbed into the coral. Now, interestingly enough, as the ocean gets warm, for your side trivia for the day, that zooxanthony is actually expelled from the coral and it bleaches it out. And the zooxanthony is what allows the coral to live. Without this algae in the coral, it actually dies. And it can expel most of it and a lot of it, but it has to be able to reabsorb it to be able to survive. And if the water's too warm, it'll expel all of it and it'll eventually bleach and die. So there's your useless information for the day. Just something interesting to have. Other special equipment is really nice. Communication at depth can be challenging, right? Especially if you're the new dive buddy, you're not quite sure what those communication symbols and signs are. They might be telling you, hey, and you're like, what the heck are you talking about, dude? Right? So there may be, which I'm trying to tell you, lobster, right? So lobster on the edge. Look, lobster. But you're like, just a minute ago, you're like, what the, is he having a seizure? Call 911? So you want to make sure you have a way to communicate. Dive slates are a really great way to do that. And it's a nice, simple thing that you can have on with a nice little, I happen to have a broken grease pencil here, but you can take it right on a grease pencil with it on a grease pencil, and you can communicate very easily. Other nice thing with a slate, if you have it you should have an SMB in a line. If there is an emergency, you can always write a note on the SMB, tie it to your slate, or write it on the slate, tie it to your SMB, and send it up to the surface for the boat as well. So just really cool different things you can have. Set of dive tables never hurts, right? You should have a good diving computer that's able to keep you safe through this process, but having a set of dive tables to have a basic idea of, am I able to do this dive? We're going to 130 feet. I'm not on nitrox. I've got I can look at my dive table and say I've only got 5 minutes of that. So having your dive tables and not having to memorize them is definitely to your advantage. Well, wait a minute. Holy cow, the boat put me on 32% nitrox. Can I do 130 feet? No, I can't actually do 130, but I can do a 120-foot dive on that. But how long? So not having to memorize. By the way, it's 15 minutes. But being able to know that kind of stuff. Other things, as you're going to do these deep dives, having a set of diver tools with you is definitely invaluable. And in my diver tools, I always carry a little pack of O-rings. The O-rings, pack of 30 or 40 of them cost you about $5-10. So they're about 50 cents, 20 cents each, right? How happy would you be to have to call a dive because you had an O-ring broke that would have cost you 50 cents on land?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, not so happy. And the thing about it is Caleb, how easy is it to get that broken O-ring out unless you have a pick?
You can't.
You can't. So having a few tools like that definitely goes a long way. Plus, you look really cool when you flip out a switchblade on the deck. Don't have a switchblade. I'm just kidding. But having some basic diver tools, some screwdrivers, some flat, some picks, a few wrenches, and some basic stuff goes a long way. Zip ties, by the way, gold. If you do not have a zip tie, I promise you, when something breaks, you'll wish you did. And you can get a whole mess of them at Home Depot. You can actually get colors of them. They come in pink and red and yellow, and you can get colored zip ties if you really want to make sure you're all cool like that. And then a few basic things, spare parts and repair kit. We kind of already talked about that. I think we kind of beat that horse with a stick already. As we kind of go through this in our total diving system, I think it's really important to make sure to note that we always want to make sure we're buying that from a local dive center, right? We want to make sure, and from an authorized dealer. Getting O-rings for your tank at Home Depot, while might save you a penny or two, are they auction rated? Or do you really want to breathe on something that a plumber could buy? I mean, it's only your life. Just saying. So making sure you purchase your equipment. It'll also be nicer equipment and more durable, and you'll have less issues. The photo on the right-hand side, by the way, that's Nikki and I at Yellowstone National Lake, or at the park right across from the lake. And you can see we've got a bunch of tanks there. We're literally 3.5 hours from any normal civilization on another dive center, So making sure we have our gear serviced with and purchased from an authorized dealer becomes pretty important, because you get out to Yellowstone, you get ready to get into the lake and something breaks, you're not happy. Not happy at all, that's for sure. So my other piece of it is always buy from your local store, because if you buy from the Amazon or from Chicago, you're helping somebody buy a beach house in Bali. If you buy from Idaho Dive Pirates, you're helping keep a little girl in piano lessons. So House of Bali, piano lessons. I'm going to go with the piano lessons. So as we kind of go through this, the SSI service program, as you buy your own gear, it's definitely important to make sure that you're having it serviced at a local shop, and that it is continuing to go through that process. We have a complete service program, and most people don't realize that the service program doesn't just cover just the thing you breathe on, the regulator, the first stage and second stage. It covers the buoyancy compensator as well. The information system, make sure that it's got fresh batteries in it. It's going to work. Make sure that it's set up for nitrox if you're nitrox certified. Checks the buoyancy compensator. Make sure the springs actuate. Nothing more fun than having a spring get stuck into the open position and having a runaway inflation. So make sure before every dive trip that you're taking the time to bring your stuff into the dive shop as well. So we're going deep. Do you think service support people might be reasonably important?
Yes.
Absolutely. Now, certainly down the line, you can get more, when you have a lot more experience, you can certainly get to that jolly exciting point with where Nikki and I are at, and we go out to Ryrie. We spend an hour at 130 feet and another hour coming back up. And it's just that Nikki and I out there. But at this point in your career, as you're jumping off a boat, making sure you have somebody to help you in the water, out of the water, making sure that somebody knows what's going on. And at the very least, if you are going to go diving with just a buddy out at Ryrie, it's a good idea to have somebody that knows that you're going. Hey, text your mom. Hey, Mom, I'm at Ryrie. I'm going in the water now. I should be texting you back in about, it's 12 o'clock now. I'll text you back at 1:15 when I get out of the water. Not a bad plan, right? A little bit of service support definitely goes a long way. So as you kind of go through this process, other cool things you can do if you're jumping off a boat doing deep dives, a descent line and ascent line is very nice. Your first time going deep will be a little bit concerning because you don't know what's down there. You haven't been there before. You ever gone into somebody else's house and had to walk into a completely dark room where you didn't know anything was at?
It's a good comparison.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. A little bit of anxiety there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mentioned in your long life at this point, you've never had Jason actually jump out at you, and try and hack you up with a knife, right? So that's not actually a thing that happens, right? Same thing, but you don't know that with the ocean because in the ocean there's sharks and there's things that will sting you, bite you, eat you. There's whale sharks and whales and all kinds of so you don't know what's down there, right? The fear of the unknown is definitely one of those things. I got to respond to a quick message real quick. Tonight I am teaching. There we go. So having a descent line is definitely very nice because then you have something to guide you down. It's just definitely a nice thing, and it's a nice thing to be able to come up on as well. One of Nikki and I's favorite wrecks is they call it the Lady Luck. It's 140 foot at the sand, 128 foot on the deck. Great wreck, but it's at a very heavy current. So when you jump off, you swim to the buoy and you take the descent line down. And when you get ready to come back up and you want to do your safety stop, you hang on to that rope because you feel like a flag. It's a pretty kicking current when you get up into the current. When you get on the deck onto the boat, there's no current. But when you come up at about 40 feet, there's definitely a very strong current. So having a descent line and ascent line is very nice. It's not something you'll see every dive, but it's definitely a nice thing to have. If you are doing a stationary dive, having a safety stop on cylinder on the line is definitely nice as well. Let's see. Sorry, Gary's texting me as well. So having a safety cylinder, so something happens, you misjudge your time. You didn't do that basic thing that I tell everybody: watch your damn gauge. I had a student ask me last night, "How do you keep from running out of air?" And I says, "Shh, it's a secret. I can tell you, but you can't tell anybody else." He's like, "Yeah." He says, "Watch your gauge." That's how you keep running out of air. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, how do you keep running out of gas in your car? You watch the gas gauge. It's pretty straightforward. You get down to where there's 5 miles left on your tank, and you're on the road between Twin Falls and Pocatello. You done screwed up, buddy, because it's been telling you for the last hour exactly where you were at. You knew to stop in Pocatello or in American Falls. You knew that. You saw that. You've been watching that. If you'd been watching, it would have been a problem. Same thing with a PSI gauge. It's just like a gas gauge. Starts at 3,000, works its way all the way down to 0. And it's not like you're diving 1,000 feet where 1,000 PSI can go in a minute. You're diving normal depths where it's going 1,000 PSI should last you, 100 feet, 1,000 PSI should last you 10 minutes. You've had 10 minutes to make a wise decision at 100 feet, right? At 30 feet, you've had a lot of time to make that decision. So watch your cylinder. It's basic stuff, right? Surface marker buoys, definitely a good thing. In the lakes, I'm gonna put it out like this: we do run surface marker buoys sometimes, but I do not run them in the lakes, and here's why. There is this person called the Idaho boater. They are the most dangerous and scary person on the entire planet. Because you know what it takes to be a boater in Idaho?
Nothing. A boat.
A boat. You have to be able to buy a boat or borrow a boat. You don't even need a driver's license. So there's no boater safety course. There's no testing. You have to be able to get it off the trailer, basically. That's the only requirement. You got to be able to get it in the water. And even sometimes not even that, right? So they're pretty scary, and they get very curious. They see these really cool red and white flags, and they're like, "Yay! That must be a crawdad trap. I better check that out." And they will come over and they'll play with it. My personal favorite are the water skiers that use it as a ski bobber. I have seen that. So I don't generally run a surface flag in a lake, but in the ocean, we always do. We make sure of that. Some of the other key points is if we're going to start going deeper or diving in period, we should definitely make sure we have a couple things like oxygen, first aid kit, radio communication, and maybe an accident management plan might be to our advantage as well. Now, Jamie, why do you think we should have oxygen close?
Just most of the medical emergencies that could happen, oxygen's your first thing that you'll do for treatment.
Absolutely. So knowing where to and how to procure pure O is definitely a key thing, right? I can tell you when you dive with me in the back of my truck, I've got an EMT bag. I've got 2 bottles of oxygen. I've got an AED. We have a full medical kit, as well as a brand new suture stapler kit that I'm happily staple any part of you to any other part of you, just in case. So we keep that, and we keep that in ideas. Now, here in the landlocked states, we don't have a radio, but we do have a cell phone. So we know where cell phone signal is. And we also, our accident management plan is, if something happens at Ryrie, we're going to get you on oxygen, assess the situation, hopefully not have to get you breathing, but if we do, we'll AED you or CPR you. And we're going to take you to Mountain View Hospital that has 2 decompression chambers. We could also take you to ERMAC, who happens to have two hyperbaric chambers. So we have that ability. So we've got our basic management plan is get you out of the water, assess the situation, get you on oxygen, make sure you're breathing, call 911 and get you to ERMAC or to Mountain View. That's our plan. It's not rocket science, right? As part of that. But wherever you do dive, you want to make sure you know what that accident management plan looks like, is, and feels like, right? And this goes, just so you know, all this same, it goes exactly for for night diving as well. Not just because you're deep diving, but night diving, any type of diving that you're doing. Now, when we start talking about deep diving, we start talking about our specific limits. Right now, you're currently certified to 60 feet US, right? Mm-hmm. Now, you can get an advanced adventurer certification that'll take you from 60 to 100 feet. But we start increasing our risk at that 60 to 100 feet. You're working on your deep dive certification, which will certify you to 130 feet. And the good news is we're going to talk about all the bad stuff about that first. So all the scary stuff, but just be aware that each time you pass one of these levels, you increase your risk. Now, for me, the key understanding of diving is that I realize very clearly that diving is a dangerous sport. It's plain and simple. As long as I realize and remember that diving is a dangerous sport, then I can start saying, okay, why is it dangerous? What makes it dangerous? What's dangerous about it? And I can start putting those pieces together and I say, okay, if diving is a dangerous sport, why? DCS, okay. I'm going to make sure I have a good computer. I'm going to make sure I dive within my limits. I'm going to make sure I'm very careful with my gas consumption. I'm going to make sure I'm very careful with my gas management plan. I'm going to make sure I have an accident management plan. I'm going to make sure that I have, So I start putting those levels together. And every time I increase one of these levels, I make sure to understand that I'm increasing my danger amount on that as well. And there's a lot of different types of danger. We're going to go through a few of those tonight. So deep diving plan, surface air consumption, and minimum PSI. Now, factors involved in breathing gas and your gas consumption, how fast you're going to go through the gas, there's a lot of factors involved in that. Physical size of the diver, fitness level of the diver, the experience level of the diver. As Caleb might have noticed, that I tend to go through a lot less gas than Caleb. Caleb, why do you think that is?
You're more relaxed.
I am. I've done this a bunch. I do this through experience, and I've got a lot more experience doing it. As you build up that experience, you'll relax out, and as you relax, you'll have less gas consumption. Stress level of diver is a big portion of gas consumption as well. One of the things I can tell you that if you start to have an incident of any kind, whether minor or major, your gas level, your stress level will go up. And if your stress level goes up, your gas consumption goes up considerably. I had a situation. I am solo dive certified. And so I like to start this conversation with this idea. As being a solo dive certified, I was doing 108 foot at Ryrie by myself, and my light went out and something pulled the regulator out of my mouth, both at the same time. And I didn't panic. And I was like, okay, it's dark. I couldn't see anything. And I went to pull my regulator and nothing happened. I couldn't pull it back. It was caught on something. No problem. I reached down, found my safety second, cleared it, put it in, found my spare light, checked my other light. Turned out the bezel wasn't turned all the way. So I turned the bezel the rest of the way, clicked, came right back on. I was able to spot my regulator was caught up in a tree branch. I reached over, pulled it out of the tree branch, took my safety second out, put my primary in, worked just fine. put my safety second away, cleaned it up. Everything was good to go. Put my spare light away, continued on my journey. It probably went about that fast. It was less than a minute worth of action, right? The interesting story for that is while you had watched me, it was just that relaxed. My demeanor didn't change. I didn't turn into a spaz. I wasn't Urkel at any point in this dive. I was okay, no big deal. Okay, whatever. Figured it out, right? As I watched my gas consumption on my dive computer, it went from where I averaged around, at that time, I was about 11 liters a minute. It was pretty typical for me at that time. I went from 11 liters a minute to 35 liters a minute. A fairly significant change. And it took about 10 minutes for it to certainly slow down and come back into my normal 11 liters a minute. Physically, nothing had changed. Mentally, everything had changed. In that 60 seconds of time, I had envisioned everything that could have gone wrong. If I pull this, could I breathe from the hose? Can I ditch my gear and swim to the surface? Am I caught here? What's going on? What if I don't figure it out? 18 situations go through the process. Now, for me, it's pretty much, and I'll go into this a little bit. We'll go into it a lot more in just a moment. For me, it's a pretty simple process. Stop, breathe, think, and then act. Not a big deal. Okay, I can't breathe right now because I've got a regulator. Safety second. Breathe. Okay, what's next? Secondary light. No problem. Primary light fixed. Think your way through the situation. But as I think about this, my goal is I don't make one more action unless it brings me one step closer to safety. Nothing I do has got anything to do with anything other than one step closer to safety. So as we go through that, so stress level is definitely a big idea. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit. Breathing habits of the diver. Are you breathing correctly? And I can tell you no. And in diving, we want to move into a more ideal type of breathing. Now, have you ever watched a baby breathe?
Yeah.
Okay, where do they breathe from?
They're normally like, now my they breathe through their nose, or so when they congested, like they have to move to their
mouth. What rises? Which part of their body rises and falls?
Well, their whole abdomen, kind of, since it's, but
absolutely. Like now you're a fairly attractive young woman. I imagine most times when you're around a guy, you suck that little tummy in and you breathe through your chest, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Every guy and girl does it. If you were a guy, I would have said the same thing. The thing about it is you're not breathing right. You're breathing from your your chest, your lungs, not from your diaphragm, your belly, because you're afraid to make that flat little tummy look fat, right? We all are. It's our vanity. The thing about it is 60% of the oxygenation from your lungs comes from the bottom 30% of your lungs. So which side do I want to oxygenate first? The bottom third, right? So first off, in belly breathing, we breathe in through our belly, into our chest, out from our chest, out from our belly. Just by doing that, you increase the oxygenation of your body considerably. 60% of the oxygenation of your lungs comes from the bottom 30%. Pretty crazy?
Yeah.
Other things that cause, it should be common sense that workload and performance of the diver. So how heavy you work during a dive. So the deeper you go, the less the workload you want to have, right? The less things you want to task yourself with. We all know that we will use less oxygen walking gently through Walmart as we would running through the store at trying to mad dash it, right? So the less workload we do, the less air we'll have to use to make that happen. The less our cardiovascular system will have to work to oxygenate our muscles, right? Other things that happen, temperature of the water. The colder the water, the more gas you will go through. Caleb has got a lot of experience with that particular thing. When that water gets cold, you suck the gas, right? And Nikki and I could tell you that on a 117 cubic foot tank, in a full face mask in the summertime when it's nice and warm, we can get about an hour and a half of dive time out of that tank. In the cold water of Ryrie at 32 degrees, we get about 45 minutes to 50 minutes. We lose considerable amount because of the cold of the body, and cold of the water as well. We're having to work harder. Other things that affect how much gas you're going to go through is the depth of the dive. And we talked a little bit about partial pressure in open water. Let's see, you see my backpack, babe? Oh, there it is. Let me grab my visual. I have a visual aid for this. I'm very excited. I usually have it on my desk, but I took it to class tonight. Let's see. Thank you for being patient. So we talked about partial.
The other day.
Got your own finally? So I made these up the other day. They're about perfect. So we talked about partial pressure. This is how partial pressure works. If this was one molecule of the air we're breathing, 21% oxygen, 79% nitrogen, right? Mm-hmm. It's about 1 cubic inch, right? Well, at the surface, it takes up this much space. But at 33 feet, 2 of them squeeze into the same amount of space. So now we have 2 molecules of oxygen in the same amount of space. They compressed. At 66 feet, we now have 3 molecules of oxygen in the same amount of space. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So the gas is compressed, right? So that 80 cubic foot tank we're diving at 33 feet is equal to 40 cubic feet, right? At 66 feet, it's equal to 30 cubic feet. At 99 feet, it's equal to 20 cubic feet of gas. So as we get deeper, it takes more gas to fill the space. Do the size of your lungs change from the surface to 99 feet?
I was going to say the gas becomes more compressed, but the lungs are the...
Exactly. My hands don't change size either. I usually get somebody that asks, they say, yeah, your lungs get smaller. I'm like, well, do your feet get smaller? No? Okay, no, neither do your lungs. They say the same size. But it takes more of the compressed gas to fill the same amount of space. So literally, if I can breathe for an hour on an 80 cubic foot tank at the surface, how long could I breathe? Would it take me to breathe that same tank at 33 feet?
Well, I guess less time, or no, you'd go through it faster at depth, right?
Mm-hmm. How long would it last?
33 feet, you said that's 2 bars, twice as fast, right?
Twice as fast. So 30 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it would go faster at 66 feet. It'd go faster at 99 feet. So if I could last an hour at the surface at 99 feet, that'd be 15 minutes. Make sense?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Absolutely. So the depth of the water is huge. Other things to be aware of: gas loss due to leaks in the cylinder valves and gauge and regulators. Definitely want to make sure your gear is well serviced. Other things that will help you go through gas is gas required to equalize and maintain buoyancy with your inflator. Now, that's why one of the reasons you want to make sure that perfect buoyancy and you are well dialed in on your buoyancy, because every time you push that button is one less breath of gas that you get to breathe. Make sense?
It's a good way of thinking about it.
I think about it every time I push my inflator button on my dry stick.
Do I really want
I have to keep up with Benjamin.
Yeah. Absolutely. So just be aware that every time you touch that, so that's one of the reasons you want to be to as close to perfect weighting as you can be, is that every time you have to use that, more weighting means more gas to keep you floating, right? Which means less breath you're going to use. The other thing to be aware about perfect weighting in buoyancy is that the more I carry, it's much easier to hike up the stands at Bora High School with nothing on my back versus putting 30 pounds on my back. The more weight you're carrying, the more it's going to cost you cardiovascular. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, as you're figuring your sac rate, just be aware that sac rate will change dependent upon the size of the cylinder you use. Why do you think that is?
Size. I was going to say weight or material, but why the size would affect your surface? In terms of like, if it's like a really big tank and it's harder to carry, like you're going to burn through more, but
no, as if you use the sac rate formula for with SSI that SSI teaches, they do not account for the amount of gas in a tank. So if you use the SSI formula, you have to use it for every type of tank that you use. So an 80 cubic foot cylinder carries 80 cubic feet. But if I don't take that into account and I take that same sac rate I used for an 80 cubic foot cylinder and I use a 100 cubic foot cylinder, all of a sudden I'll think, wow,
Yeah.
my sac rate has gone way down. No, your sac rate's the same. It's just you didn't calculate the cylinder size. So it's one of the reasons that when we get to Homestead, you and I are going to do a sac rate calculation, but we're not going to do it the normal way. I'm going to teach you a much different way to do it.
Okay.
So deep dive planning and communication. So as we start planning our dives in deep diving, we want to make sure we're taking into account a few different things. What are some of the things that we should take into account when we're getting ready to go out and do a deep dive?
How deep you want to dive, like what your goals are, like
what's my plan? Absolutely. What else?
How many trips or like how many dives you want to make?
Sure, dive planning. So overall dive planning. What else?
Things like I don't know, thinking that like your approach. I don't know. I'm thinking of random things like what approach you're going to make.
Entry, exit, sure,
yeah.
Absolutely. How you're going to get in, how you're going to get out. Those are super important. Absolutely. What else?
Experience level of everyone, like any limiting variables.
What everybody's going to look like? What I need to work with everybody? What else?
Navigation stuff. If it's like a there and back, if there's currents.
Current. Absolutely. You ever heard the term in Idaho that or Idaho Falls? If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes.
Yes.
So environmental conditions might be reasonably important as we kind of go through this process. What's it going to be? Is it snowing? Nick and I have done plenty of dives in the snow, that's for sure. We've done dives where we popped up and we couldn't see the shore because of the snow. Absolutely. So is it snowing? How about getting down to the water in that snow? Is it going to be slick? Nikki's got a great video of me the other day running twin sets, getting into the river. I fell on my butt because it was slick, right? Just bam. And I was a turtle. I couldn't get back up because I had 2 tanks on my back. So, environmental conditions, it absolutely is a thing. How cold is the water? Am I wearing the right exposure protection, right? Right now, or just before the water froze, absolutely dry suit was required, right? The first week we dive in Yellowstone in June, absolutely dry suit is absolutely required. The water temperature is going to be 33 degrees. We usually end our dives because we are cold, not because we have run out of gas. So environmental conditions are huge. Making sure you understand, waves, currents. I've been out at Ryrie where I wouldn't get in the water because there was too much wind and the waves and currents were just waves at the surface were just no fun. Nick and I did a dive out of Yellowstone in Mary Bay one time. We swam, what do you think, about 100 feet out, Ben?
Yeah, maybe.
We went about 100 feet out. The problem is to get to any depth where you can start diving that particular area, you need to swim out at least a quarter of a mile.
Well, so at that 100 feet, it was still like 5 feet deep.
Yeah. But there was
less.
a storm coming in and the waves were coming in. The problem is the lakes, the waves are about a foot apart. So they slap, 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 slap. And so we dropped at about 100 feet off the shore and it was 5 feet. And we swam for 35 minutes before we started getting any kind of depth. At 35 minutes, we were still at 20 feet. So environmental conditions are pretty important, right? Wind, storm. We've been in diving the lake when we had a major hailstorm happen above us, which was kind of cool. As we got down, we were at 50 feet and listening to the hailstorm above us sounded like the whole earth was coming to an end. It was kind of, okay. It was pretty cool. It really was. But you want to definitely be very aware of that. Dive planning. How about communication with your buddy?
Yeah, I was gonna say establishing basic communication things, how you want to talk.
Exactly. So if I told you my gas is, how much gas do I have?
2,700.
Exactly. I teach the one-handed method, but it could also be 2, 7, right? Or it could be 2, 7, so making sure we understand and we talk the same language, right? Going over our hand and arm signals. That we're going to see crawdads, lobster, drumfish, seahorses.
It's over there.
Yep. Whales.
Aww.
Sometimes you make signs up underwater too. Like I've done that to Benjamin before, and he's like, "What?"
Yeah. Thinking, the first time I've got a P symbol came up, I wasn't sure what the hell she was telling me. I'm like, and you don't dry suit. We dive dry suit most of the time. So communications is pretty darn important. Now, as we start getting into this deeper diving, we definitely need to be aware of flying and driving after diving is definitely something we need to take into consideration. We've built up a lot more nitrogen because we're going deeper. So we need to make sure we're sticking to that rule of at least 24 hours after we exit the water before we get on an airplane. At least. Now, if you've gone out and you've done a whole week's worth of diving, and a lot of those were deep diving, it's probably to your advantage to go ahead and wait 36 hours. But 24 hours is the recommended minimum. Now, one of the things that you'll find as well is a lot of places we dive. For example, we're going to be diving at Homestead Crater. Homestead Crater is at 6,000 foot elevation. And no matter which direction you leave Homestead Crater, you're going to go over a mountain pass that's 2,000 feet higher than what you were just diving.
Oh, interesting.
So you need to wait at least 2 to 4 hours before you leave Homestead Crater. So as you're doing some of these deeper divings, remember, you cannot ascend more than 1,000 feet after you get out. So you need to make sure you're taking into account that. And the problem is a lot of the deep diving you're going to want to do locally. There's going to, if it's not Ryrie, you're probably going to go over a mountain pass somewhere. Just is, right? Yeah. So just being in consideration and making sure you're aware of that. Now, for me, everything is about planning, right? Pre, during, and post planning. What is that going to look like? So when we get ready to start doing our pre-dive planning, what are some of the things that you and I want to talk about? We've already talked about the weather. That's good to go. But what are some of the key things that you and I want to talk about?
How many oxygen tanks we're going to want to use, like the configuration.
Well, hopefully you're not using any oxygen tanks.
Air. I'm used to.
I mean, how many tanks? You could be using nitrogen. Yeah. So yeah, planning your dive. So planning within our no dive decompression limits. Wouldn't that be kind of where we want to be? Mm-hmm. We want to plan our dives, right? Okay, so dive 1, we're going to do 120 feet. We're going to be down for 15 minutes, and we're going to come back up and da-da-da. So planning within the no dive decompression limits are definitely going to be key. How about a pre-buddy check, pre-dive check?
Yeah, make sure you're familiar with each other's setup and.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Make sure you have each other's setup, right? As well. Not just understand each other's, but make sure your buddy has everything they need. Absolutely. I've seen people jump off the boat without fins. I've absolutely seen it. It happens, right? I've jumped into the water without fins.
I almost have.
It happens, right? So I played the fun LDS game called Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes. That's my buddy check. I turn to Nikki as I'm because usually I clip her chest strap. And I hook up her dry suit hose, but I play head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Does she have a hood on? Does she have her mask? Yes. And she's clipped here. She's clipped here. She's strapped here. I check the valve on the right, on her right shoulder or left shoulder, and I check her valve. Nikki will tell you that I don't think she's ever gotten in the water when I've helped her get ready that I haven't pushed the button on her dry suit and I haven't checked her valve. Every single time. And usually I'll reach over, I'll check her inflator to make sure that it inflates and deflates as well.
Those things freeze shut more often than you'd think.
Yeah, and Nikki will tell you, we've absolutely had times where we've had those inflators freeze shut.
Maybe not ours, but definitely students.
We had ours.
That's not true. We have had ours too.
We went out to the river a few weeks ago to do a dive. I was doing twin sets, and my hip dump was frozen shut, and my valve was frozen shut. We had to get a water container and unfreeze it. So
then I had to push the ice out of his dump valve with his hip.
Yep, it was frozen shut. I'd left the my BC in the back of the truck for about 4 hours, and it was 5 degrees. So it happens. So a little pre-check, and then as she turns away, I take a look and I check to make sure her air is on as well, that I don't see any leaks, and that everything looks good from the back. So head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Just a good way to go. And in the end, I'm responsible for me and my dive, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have a secondary opinion. Remember, we're team diving here. And that's one of the things that they probably didn't teach in your last class. That's kind of a Benism, if you will. A Ben mod is what a lot of people are calling some of my side mount stuff that I do. So a Ben mod to diving is, Brett talked to you about buddy diving, right? Where's your buddy? What's your buddy doing? But the problem is you and I can go to Home Depot as buddies, and there's times where we may go 10 minutes without me keep putting eyes on you to make sure you're okay. Would that be fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
If you get it now, Home Depot is not nearly as exciting as a big, pretty reef with lots of fish and coral and eels and coral shrimp and crabs and lobsters. It's much more exciting. So it's easy to go that 10 minutes without really being close enough to be able to help each other. Okay. Very easy to do. How long can you hold your breath?
Me personally, not very long, like maybe a minute.
Okay. So a minute. That still means that you're 9 minutes short if we haven't really checked in on each other in 10 minutes. Right.
Yeah.
So what I want you to think about is I don't buddy dive. I don't have a buddy. I team dive. And so this is a Ben mod for your class. So team diving is a very different thing, right? If we're a team, I'm constantly there to help you out, right? If you think about the team environment in sports, right? How close is the front line of the team? They're close enough to be able to help each other, right? They're always there that I can get a hold of you and I can help you with something. My team buddy is helping me. Together, everybody achieves more, is what we always say, right? So I want you to think about team diving, and you need to be close enough. This is not close enough. I need to be able to be pretty much over to be able to touch Nikki so she can grab me, touch me in some way that if something happens, I can get a hold of her. She can get a hold of me. Something we can make that communication. Team diving. So I want you to get that buddy diving crap out of your head now and start getting the team diving environment. Okay. When you dive with somebody, if you cannot touch them, you are too far. Now, the deeper you go and the bigger the dives you do, the more absolutely positively important that becomes. You're starting to enter that realm of deep diving. Team diving is not just a suggestion here. It's a requirement. You've got to team dive, because at that 120-foot level, if something goes sideways, it'll go sideways fast. And what you'll find in diving is you never have just one problem. There's always two problems, and they come together into one wonderful problem. And how you solve that is all the difference. And having a buddy to be able to help solve that with you is definitely key importance, right? That's why we don't want to solo dive. And while I teach solo diving and I have solo dive that I dove by myself, when I do that, I do it with redundancy. I make sure I've got extra stuff, right? And make sure I'm good there. And there's a class for that. And we're a little early for that class for you. Caleb's a little early for that class, to be honest with you. I don't like to teach that class until you have about 150, 200 dives. So that's when we start talking about teaching that class, because you're just starting to get that point where you're ready to move past first grade into second grade. We're just about done eating crayons and paste, and you're ready to start having lunch by yourself and stop having naps.
Mac
right?
and cheese.
So that's kind of where we get. So make sure that we got a good team diving buddy check as well. What are our service procedures? What is our no-go decision? What's acceptable to call the dive? Getting ready, proper weighting, pre-entry buddy checks, and surface procedures. Making sure we go through that and we're clear on all these pieces. Nikki and I always talk about our dives. We get ready to walk down the ramp, and it's okay. We're diving a single today, so let's plan on a 40-minute dive. If we get a little bit extra, it's okay. We talk about it, right? And there's times, Nikki, this last dive a week ago, Sunday, when we went out, we were about the 30-minute mark. Nikki got my attention. She gave me that cold symbol. We were about 60, 70 feet. That's okay. We turned and started heading to our service, did our safety stop, followed the line, and came up at the docks. But it was okay. We were clear on our communication with that process.
Hey, Ben, could you adjust the screen so I can see your slides again?
Oh, sure. I was actually just doing everything verbally.
Oh, okay, cool. If you're not following slides, then yeah, no worries.
Sometimes I'm a visual person. He needs reminders.
I use them. A lot of times I use them as reminders, and I like to look at you guys as well when I'm teaching. So one of the things we want to.
So have you shared your screen with her?
Nope, there's nothing to see. It's just a picture of a balloon and two divers. It's really nothing important. So as we start getting ready to do descents, one of the things we want to be aware of, and I've seen this happen, where I get people that are
night limited viz. We do it with our eyes shut. Just kidding.
Absolutely. So as we start our descents, one of the things I see that people get really excited. They want to get down and like get deep and go excited and right. I'm confident. I'm a strong diver. Well, yippee skippy for you. But the problem with fast descents is it can create additional problems. So take your time as you get ready to do these descents. You want to make sure you're diving in a team environment with your buddy so that you guys are together the whole time, communicating, eyes ready to go, that you're able to help each other, but you take your time. One of the things that is happening is there's a lot of pressure being built up on your body. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about that pressure and how some of those effects in a little bit. But one of the things I want you to just get the idea of, take your time on your descent, allow your body to acclimatize. And while you won't feel a difference in the pressure that you can notice, and you probably won't feel a difference in your breathing, it is absolutely there. One of the interesting things that happens in your body is as you get a higher gas density and it becomes more difficult for your body to breathe, your body does some pretty interesting things. Your brain signals and says, wait a minute, oxygen is not happening the way it's supposed to happen. And so what it does is your lungs will only allow about 16% of the oxygen to pass through the alveolar, through the hemoglobin barrier into your bloodstream. And so you're literally oxygenating with only 16% of the available oxygen through. But what the body says is, wait a minute, something's weird. I'm not getting enough oxygen. It's bad stuff's happening. And it'll actually increase the amount of oxygen in the brain to combat the carbon dioxide that's happening as well, the carbon dioxide buildup. As it starts increasing this oxygen content in the throughout your body, oxygen has a narcotic effect, and you'll start getting hello. You get excited, you get nervous, you get giddy, right? All these cool things. And so be aware that if you give your body the time to descend more slowly and to acclimatize more appropriately to the new depth that you're getting to, it allows your brain to say, okay, I see that this is happening, but it's not as bad as I thought it was. It's not a sudden shock, right? It's not like getting punched in the nose. Oh, and that's, if you descend too quickly, it's literally like getting punched in the nose. It's like a sudden shock. Oh my gosh, something's happened, right? But allow your body to gently acclimatize. Be gentle with yourself. You don't need to be a daredevil in this process. So as we kind of go through this process, we also want to make sure that we're controlling our buoyancy through this process. The last thing we want to do is crash the bottom, right? Crash into other things. Making sure we control our buoyancy to make sure our descent is nice and slow and taking our time. Now, one of the things I see a lot of is as soon as divers, they let all that gas out of their BC, they stay in that vertical position. And they descend all the way through. You probably saw a lot of that in your open water class. Let's change that. Perfect buoyancy means that you're in diver position. And what you want to think about is, as soon as that head pops below the air, below the water surface, you want to go ahead and change into parachute position. If you're in parachute position or diver position, you're able to see what's coming up on you. You're able to see the bottom coming to you. You can monitor your systems. You can monitor what's going on, and it's more easy to orientate yourself to navigation principles as well. You're able to say, okay, I'm currently facing north, whatever, doesn't matter, right? But I'm able to control that, and I can control my descent, just like a parachuter. As I go down, and as I get to the bottom, I can slow that down, and I can now maneuver and stay in that position. Allow yourself the time and control your buoyancy. As you're descending, make sure you're monitoring your instruments the entire time. How deep am I? Where this really gets concerning is places like if you're diving a wall. Molokini is one of my favorite examples of this. The Molokini wall is 400 feet deep. We go to 130 on it because that's where the shark feeding station is, and it's wonderful. But if you don't monitor your depth, it's easy to get down to 140, 150, 180 feet because there's no real reference. 150 feet looks like 140 feet. It looks like 130 feet. monitor your gas, and monitor your instruments. It's very easy. Redfish Lake is another great example. There's a beautiful wall about mid lake that's 400 feet. It's not 400. It's about 320 feet deep at this wall. And the thing is you can get down to 130 feet, and you're not quite sure unless you're monitoring your instruments. You won't know. And if you're not monitoring your instrument through this whole dive, it's very easy. On Molokini, the first time I dove Molokini, I saw this beautiful eagle ray doing his thing, and I started chasing after him. And I started at 110 feet, luckily, and I was chasing over because I wanted to get a better picture of him, and I get deeper, and I just happened to look at my gauge, and I was at 130 feet before I realized it, and I didn't notice it. It all looked the same, and he was still another 50 feet below me. And I was like, okay, this is the place I stop. So monitor your gauge. I just cannot bring that up enough. Monitor your instruments. Now, orientation navigation is huge. When do you think you should take your first compass reading?
On land.
On surface. Not just on land, but before you do your dive. Orientate yourself to where everything is. At Ryrie, it's easy. We orientate ourselves out. We know that no matter where we're at on the dive, if something happens and I need to get back to shore, 19 degrees. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. If from the private docks, or not for the boat launch, I mean, to get out to the deep, it's 270 degrees. We've measured that at the surface. So if something happens while we're at depth, Caleb will tell you absolutely at Ryrie, it's very easy to get turned around. Think you're going one way and actually end up going another. So make sure you orientate yourself.
We had some fun at that at Belmont when we dove.
Well, likewise,
Wait, which one were?
The reciprocal to me of 270 is not 19 degrees. And Benjamin's told me shore is at 19 degrees. And I'm like, but 270 minus 90 is not 19. How is 19 degrees going to get me back to the boat dock?
It doesn't. It gets you to shore. Shore is the closest thing. So we
failed to mention that.
At Ryrie, we always turn 19 degrees because it brings us to shore, shallows us up, and then you just make a hard right and you head back to the docks. But that's the shore will always be close to shore will always be 19 degrees. So make sure you communicate those kind of things.
At Ryrie, which Jamie has not dove yet. So yes. It's different.
Different wherever you go, but make sure you,
next summer.
But wherever you go, orientate yourself clearly. Communicating with your buddy. We've talked about that quite a bit. And another big one, lost buddy procedures. Make sure you talk about, if you haven't dove with somebody before, make sure you're clear on what the lost buddy procedures are. I can tell you from personal experience that there's some people out there that have really weird ideas of what to do when they lose their buddy. Here's how I know that. I was teaching a tech class to somebody. We were out at Ryrie. We'd gotten to 90 feet. We were going down to 120 feet. Visibility was crap. And I started down the hill. I looked at my buddy and I signaled, we're going down the hill. I got down to 120 feet, literally 45 seconds later, and I turned, he was gone. So I came back up the hill to find him, and he was gone. I'm like, where the hell did he go? And so I looked. Our buddy procedure was 2 minutes looking in a circle. We were doing a deco dive, right? And we hadn't got to deco yet, but I did my circle looking for him. And then I went ahead and I just swam a loop real quick to see if I found him, and didn't find him. Viz was really bad. So I stopped. I started a gentle ascent, continually lurking, flashing, looking up and down. Got to my safety stop, did my safety stop, flashing my light up and down, looking at a 360, popped to the surface. I was about the middle of the lake. He was about 100 yards away from me, and I could, because I knew, because he'd launched his SMB, and I was watching his SMB continually moving. And so I flipped on my back. I started swimming to get to him, and I couldn't catch up to him. He finally popped the surface about 150 yards away from me. And I said, what the hell? He says, well, I thought the buddy procedure was to head towards, if I lose you, to head towards shore. I'm like, at what point ever would that be the buddy procedure to, I've lost my buddy, I'm going to swim towards shore immediately? What happens if your buddy had an emergency ascent? What happens if your buddy had a seizure? How would you get back to your buddy, right? So stop. Turn 360 for 1 minute. Flash your light and look up and down in that 360. And then start a normal ascent to the surface. If you can, if you need to do a safety stop, do your safety stop but surface.
And make sure whoever you're diving with also agrees with that.
Exactly.
Because not everyone is taught by Ben.
Yeah. Communicate that with your buddy.
So Benjamin had talked earlier too about surface support with the deep dives and things, right? So there was a number of times this summer that he was going out and doing a deep dive class with students and things, and for whatever reason, I was playing surface support instead of being in the water with them. And multiple times, I would have somebody that would pop up and be like, "Well, where's so and so?" or "I've been separated. Do you see any bubbles?" And because of how Ryrie is, and I was up on the hill, I could look down and spot where people's bubbles were, and would be like, "Yeah, they're over here, they're over there. Let's wait and have them pop up, and we'll connect you back together."
So, but make sure you talk to your buddies about that. Make sure you're clear on that. Traditionally, the lost buddy procedure is pretty straightforward. But in those cases that you haven't dove with somebody prior and people get weird ideas, make sure you communicate that with your buddy before the dive. During the dive is the wrong time to talk about that.
You're not going to share that slide? That's a cool looking slide.
This one?
It's a cool looking slide.
Right?
These are classified slides.
Yeah. Need to know. No porn.
There we go. There we go. Let me find a good one. Oh, that's not it. There we go. All right. So ascent procedures. One of the things we want to start thinking about is, when should we start ascending? How much gas should you have in your tank when you reach the surface? What's the minimum?
500 or 30.
Yeah, 500 psi is the minimum you want to end your dive, be on the surface with, not end your dive, but on the surface with. And that's a big difference, right? I need to make sure I surface with a minimum of 500 psi or 50 bar. Now, interesting enough, Caleb, what's the difference between 50 bar and 500 psi?
250 psi.
Yeah, about. Why do you think we use 50 bar or 500 psi?
Easy to remember.
Yeah, easy to remember. We can try and keep things as simple as possible. 500 psi is the minimum we want to surface with. So, Jamie, you and I are diving along, and we're getting towards the end of the dive. And we're at what psi should, at 100 feet, should we start to do our surface before and safety stop with? Where should we end our dive?
A third of what I'm trying to think of. Like, it's like a third out, a third in. Start your safety with a third.
At least we should start it with more than that. So we're on 1200 psi. We need to start calling our dive at ending and start heading toward the surface.
Okay.
Right? Because we want to try and end with a third if we can, 500 psi minimum. So about 1200 psi to 1000 psi, we need to start. It's done. Now, when should we have communicated that to each other?
Before you, or like in your pre-planning that, like.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Nikki, we're going to do this dive at 1200 psi. We'll go ahead and head to our safety stop. Good. So we head to our safety stop, because remember, we can only ascend 30 feet per minute. So if we're at 99 feet and we're coming to 15 feet, it's going to take us at least 2.5 to 3 minutes to get there, right?
Just a note on that, Ben, related to pre-dive planning. A lot of, so you talk about what point are we going to turn and go to our safety stop, but also check each other's gauges, because not every gauge, most gauges, all the gauges that I've seen will have a red indicator for when you're in the red. Obviously, but some of them are a 500 psi, some of them are actually 750 psi, because that's 50 bar. And I've personally been confused by that, where I look at that and I'm like, oh, I'm in the red. I thought I had less than I really did, and I started to say, oh, we got to end the dive faster than I thought, or something like that, because I didn't take note of where that was on the gauge before the dive.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of knowing your own equipment. Absolutely. So knowing that, but we make that agreement. Hey, we're going to, at 1200 psi, we're going to send. It's going to take us 3 minutes to get to our safety stop. And that's where our safety stop is going to be. And that's the other thing we want to communicate. At what depth is our safety stop, and what's our minimum safety stop?
15 feet for 3 to 5 minutes.
Yep. I'm going to teach you something a little different, though. I've got a different thought process on that I'd like you to adopt. That's going to increase your safety margin quite a bit. But it's something we talk about ahead of time. If we're just doing a simple dive, we talk about my safety stop. We're going to do it at this depth for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever that is, right? We're going to talk about that ahead of time, but we're going to also talk about it. And if we have it on our dive computer, I can communicate that. I can say, for example, I can say, what's your deco? This is the sign for deco, and you can look back at me and you can say, my computer says 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, whatever that is. I can communicate where I'm at and what the safety stop needs to be, right? So I can communicate that as well. But we've talked about this ahead of time, that our minimum safety stop is going to be this at this depth. So as we go through this, let's talk about this for a moment. So M value is the maximum amount of nitrogen that a cell tissue can hold before you start having problems, before it starts releasing nitrogen bubbles that are too large. Okay, easy enough.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with N value is there's no clear line between safe and unsafe. And here's why. The first reason is, Jamie, how your body absorbs nitrogen and releases nitrogen is going to be different than how my body releases nitrogen. It's different than how Nikki's body is different than how Caleb's body does release nitrogen. Here's where the rub really lies. Today, how my body releases nitrogen is different than how my body will release nitrogen tomorrow. A lot of factors go into the idea of how nitrogen bubbles are released from the tissue compartments. Some of those factors are age, health, fitness level, hydration, rest, medications. All those things go into it on how our bodies release nitrogen. Now, interestingly enough, on a side note, a study came out of the Netherlands that determined that you will reduce your chances of getting DCS or the bends by an order of magnitude of 10. You 10 times less likely to get DCS if you work out for 30 minutes in a medium cardio or aerobic way 19 to 24 hours prior to a dive. That's fairly significant.
Yeah.
10 times. If you stay warm during a dive and well hydrated, you increase that magnitude by another 5 times. So rest, hydration, and mild cardiac or aerobic exercise the day before a dive reduce your chances of getting DCS considerably by 15 times. That's huge. Huge. Now, interestingly enough, the reason for the exercise is not what you might think. There's a lot of thought processes that go in of why would exercise reduce my chances of getting DCS? The thought process are it cleans out the nitrogen out of my system. It lubricates the system, whatever it is. What it is the body releases a light enzyme into the venous system. And with that light enzyme, it actually lubricates the venous system in such a way that the nitrogen bubbles have nothing to grab onto. If they have nothing to grab onto, they can't crash into each other and perfuse into larger bubbles. So there's your useless information for the day. That's extremely helpful. I encourage strongly light aerobic exercise the day before exercising, staying hydrated. Don't drink Gatorade, just water, and make sure you get plenty of rest. But that's the problem is you have all these factors involved in what DCS is and how those bubbles act. So the problem, here's where it comes into, we have this gray area. And the last problem we have is our dive computers that we're carrying work off a general algorithm that's based upon the least common denominator. They're not based on you. They're based on an algorithm. And the problem is, I always think back to, there was a movie with about these fighter pilots, and they had to drop a bomb going Mach 10 or whatever it was on this building, and they had a 90% chance of passing out. And the pilot looked at the commander and says, I didn't get into this program because I was in the bottom 90%. I got in this program because I was in the top 1%. So I won't pass out. And he didn't, right? He's Superman, whatever, right? So the problem is we use this general algorithm based on the 100%, and we measure it that way. But the problem is maybe you are in the 1%. Maybe you're in the bottom 10%. Maybe because of the day, you're in the mid 50%, right? So the algorithm gives you a general idea, but it's not based on you. So there's a lot of factors in this. We don't know what's going on. We can only guess. And the eco theory is very interesting. But what we can say is that there is a gray area in there, and that at a certain point, silent bubbles start to create. Now, with more decompression, longer safety stop, for example, we reduce those chances completely to stay away from silent bubbles. We go from silent bubbles to bubble seeds to symptomatic bubbles as we do less deep go or faster ascents. So the theory is pretty simple on this. What should we take away from this? Dive tables and safety stops are how divers manage the size of the bubbles in their bloodstreams. Safety stops assist in the reduction of the size of those bubbles. The problem is there's no clear line between good and bad, and every diver is different in the way their body manages the bubbles' size and reduction. The simple takeaway from this, do a safety stop. It's just that easy. But let's talk about that safety stop. Let's get a little bit more in the weeds on this. This is a study done by Dan Europe in conjunction with GUI and TDI. And what they determined is between 3 groups of identical divers that they did diving for 25 minutes or 36 meters to 120 feet on nitrox. Dive group A in blue here, they did a direct ascent to the surface. Now, what we discovered in that is that we started measuring them. As soon as they hit the surface, when we measured their blood and their urine, is that they were about 70,000 bubbles per cubic liter. At the 17-minute mark, where DCS typically was sent in, they were about 119,000 bubbles per cubic liter. And over the course of the next 2 hours, those bubbles eventually decreased to, at the 2-hour mark, they were still at 19,000 bubbles per cubic liter. Dive group number 2. They did a 2-minute safety stop at 10 feet. Same thing. When they came out of the water, they had a lot less bubbles because they did that safety stop. But when they came out of the water, they were about 15,000 bubbles per cubic liter. At the 16-minute mark, they'd come up to almost 20,000 bubbles per cubic liter. And over the next 2 hours, it reduced to the point at the 2-hour mark, they were at about 5,000 bubbles per cubic liter. Dive group number 3 did something completely different. And this is where it gets a little radical. They did a 1-minute safety stop at 20 feet. They did a 4-minute safety stop at 10 feet. Their bubbles look like this. They came out of the water with the highest percentage of bubbles at about 10,000 bubbles per cubic liter. At the 15-minute mark, they'd gone down to about 7,000 bubbles per cubic liter. And at the 43-minute mark, they were at 0 bubbles per cubic liter. Is that fairly significant?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a lot different than what you've been trained to do so far. You've been taught to do a 3-minute safety stop at 15 feet. But what if we did it a little differently? What if we did a 1-minute safety stop at 20 feet, and then we ascended to the 10-foot mark, and we stayed there for 4 minutes? It's 2 more minutes underwater. Big deal, right? Yeah. But how significant would this be for A, just getting out of the water and feeling better, or even better, getting out of the water and doing a repetitive dive the same day? Safer?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's a little different thought process, but it's definitely to your advantage. The takeaway from this I want you to get is safety stops reduce bubbles. A longer safety stop reduces more bubbles than a shorter one. And a 5-minute safety stop during a repetitive dive increases your dive safety margin significantly. Do a safety stop. All right. I think we've got to beat safety stops up. So as we start getting into deeper diving, we definitely have some other key things to be aware of. Potential hazards, as we're getting deeper, regulator icing is absolutely a thing. You start getting in those 50-degree water, as the air comes out of your first stage into the second stage, because it's being decompressed, it goes through a scientific fact that it's going to drop 20 to 30 degrees. You're breathing air out of a cylinder that's about 20 to 30 degrees cooler than the ambient temperature that you're diving. So if you're diving 40 degrees and it's coming out 30 degrees colder, how cold is the air coming out?
10 degrees.
Yeah. Is that below freezing?
Yes.
Would the water, could the water freeze in your regulator?
Yeah.
So absolutely. So as you're diving this colder water, even at 50 degrees, think about 50 degrees and coming out 30 degrees, all of a sudden the air is coming out at 30 degrees and that's still below freezing. You can absolutely dive 50 degrees. So regular icing is a real thing. External icing, not a great thing, but not a bad thing as well. But internal icing becomes a big concern. as you got to go through this process. And it's not as hard to get an internal freeze as you might think. Simple things like using a safety second to inflate an SMB can cause your regulator to freeze open. I've had a regulator freeze open on me. I was diving the river about a month ago, and absolutely, there was just a little bit of moisture in my first stage, froze it to the open, and it froze internally and externally. When I got out of the water, there was about a 1/4 inch of ice on my first stage.
Oh, geez.
Absolutely. So as we go through this process, we want to make sure we're using good gear. In terms of our regulators that we're using for this, there's 2 things we want to think about. Is it cold weather rated? And is it balanced? There's 2 reasons for that. The first one is in using a cold water rated regulator, it's not going to have as much chance of freezing up. And there's definitely ratings on that as well. Nicer regulators will have a deeper cold rating on them. The other part about that is as we go deeper, we need more gas, right? We have to exchange more gas to breathe, right? So making sure we have a good balanced regulator as well. Now, the good thing is if it's cold water rated, it's generally going to be balanced as well. I have yet to run into a non-balanced cold water regulator.
Can you remind me, what do you mean when you say balanced regulator?
It allows for more gas as more gas is needed.
Oh, okay, cool.
Instead of just being a constant, letting a constant 140 out, it'll actually increase the amount of gas it'll allow out as it's needed. Other potential hazards we need to be aware of are things like nitrogen narcosis, hypercapnia, which is one of my big fun things to talk about, and we'll talk about here in a little bit, fatigue and hypothermia. So as we start diving deeper, we're putting more tax on our body. The average 100-foot dive for 50 minutes is equal to a brisk 5-mile walk, a very brisk 5-mile walk. So you start doing 3 of those a day, you're exercising quite a bit. Diving is a sport. It's not like golf where you get to ride a golf cart. It's an actual sport. You're actually putting effort in. You just don't realize it as well. Hypothermia is another thing to be aware of. One of the things that most people don't realize is hypothermia is cumulative. What do you think I mean by cumulative, Jamie?
The more time you add, like it stacks on itself. So even if you take a break, like if you haven't like completely got back to normal, like you're already starting low when you get back in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as we kind of go through this, it's definitely to your advantage to be aware of that. And we talked a little bit about the other thing that happens as well is as we start getting under pressure, we start dealing with stress. Now, this definitely happens. As we start building up pressure and pressure is building on us, we definitely want to be aware that stress is a real thing that happens. The simplest way to work through this process is stop, breathe, think, and then act. Now, the best way to work your way through a problem is not to have it at all. That's the simplest way to fix a problem is not to have it. All right. And so the simplest processes are going to be twofold for you. And so let's talk about this twofold way to deal with stress. Caleb, are you sharing your screen? You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, that was earlier when you were talking about safety steps.
Oh, okay, cool. So as we go through this process, we start dealing with stress. The first way is to avoid, and that's making sure our equipment's well balanced. We've talked about problems. We have redundant things, right? If we have SMB, we have 2. If we have a light, we have 2. If I'm solo diving, I have 2 gas sources, not just 1. Where we make sure we avoid problems before they become problems. That's the simplest way. The second way to avoid problems is to make a plan ahead of time. That's why we practice things like emergency air sharing. While we hope to God, knock on wood and my lips to God's ears and the creeks don't rise and all that, not to ever have to share with somebody else, there's that potential of needing it. We certainly learn CPA. We pray to God we never have to use CPR, right? So we plan for the action. And the way I like to think about it is like this. This retired engineer was telling a story. He had been a caboose engineer for 50 years on the railroad. And you're young, but back in my day, when I was a kid, they had this thing at the end of a train called a caboose. And there was an engineer that lived back there, and he had things that he did for the train. Now it's computer operated. But there was a person, And so one day, into his career, at one point, they were going through a mountain pass, and the train had lost some control and was about to reel off the tracks. It was a passenger train, and so this engineer walked 3/4 of the way through all the cars to the 3/4 of the front of the train, and he started flipping switches and doing rails and doing different things in each car. But the problem was the passengers are freaking out, and they're about to lose their head, right? The process. But he was very calm, cool, and collected. And he went to each car till he got to the end of the car and back to his caboose, flipping switches and doing what he was doing. And he saved the train. He was able to stop and save the whole train. And they were amazed. They said, John, how did you do it? How did you stay so calm and save the train? He says, well, early in my career, I realized that this was a situation that could happen. So I researched the situation and came up with all the potential ways that I could save the train. And I found the best way to do this. And I determined that if this happened, I would do that. The thing about it is 20 years prior to the issue, he'd made a decision of what to do in the situation, made the determination that's what he was going to do. And he forethought it every time he went out. He thought, if this happens, I'll do this. If this happens, I'll do that. He made the decision before the problem happened of what to do. All he had to do was follow through. It was just that easy. So as we go through these problems, we want to make sure we think about what could happen. We mentally prepare. So not only do we physically prepare, make sure we have good gear, but we mentally prepare what happens if. At the beginning of this lecture, we talked about diving is dangerous. No doubt in my mind. Knock on wood, it is a very dangerous sport. But we mitigate that risk by understanding and preparing for that danger and being aware that it's there. We know very clearly that we don't go over to our neighbor's Rottweiler and stick our arm in his mouth because that's dangerous. We won't come back with an arm, right? So we don't do the things that are going to get us hurt, right? We keep our distance from the Rottweiler that's growling and doing whatever it's doing. We don't stick our head in sharks' mouths. It's just not a good idea, right? We understand these basic principles. So what I want you to think about is before you get on the dive, what could happen? What can I do to solve that issue? Mentally prepare. If you're mentally prepared for it, if it does happen, you'll have no problem. So stop, breathe, think. And as part of that thinking, think, what was that issue and how could I solve it? I planned for this. My buddy's out of air. Here. No big deal, right? I'm good to go. I've made a plan for that action. I've team dived. Good example of team diving. I was diving with a gentleman. We were doing a deco dive. We'd been down to 130 feet for about an hour, and we were starting back up the wall or up the hill to come back up, and he had an uncontrolled inflation on his BC. At that time, we had 25 minutes of decompression we needed to do. Required decompression. And what that means is if we had surfaced, it wasn't a matter of if we were going to get the bends, it was how bad the bends were going to be. We would have gotten DCS guaranteed. We were at 150% of M value, guaranteed. I swam up and I caught him at about 70 feet, somewhere around there, and I was able to drag him back down. But because we were team diving, I was prepared. If something happened, I knew that I could get on top of him. We were right next to each other. I grabbed him. I had him. I got him. I literally laid on top of him. My preparation for diving with that diver as I was doing the training is I was 4 pounds heavier than I needed to be. Preparation. A little preparation goes a long way in this sport. But by being that extra 4 pounds, I was able to lay on top of him and grab a rock and hold him down while I was able to dump the gas out of his BC and figure out what had happened and get the issue fixed. Now, it did take me some time. Absolutely took me some time, and it increased our deco considerably. But I solved the issue, and as we increased this deco, we had planned for an hour-and-a-half dive. We ended up staying down for over 2 hours. Gas management. We'd planned that we were going to have enough gas that when we got out of the water, we were going to have plenty of gas, that I had enough gas to get through my dive plus get him to an emergency situation. I'd planned for extra gas. 2 problems arose on that dive. They were fixed with or not buddy diving, but team diving and proper preparation. I prepared to have enough gas that if something happened, I had extra gas. He had extra gas. I prepared mentally that if this happens, I can grab him whatever happens, and I can fix the problem. Plan ahead. The best way to fix a problem is not have it. But if it has happened, be mentally prepared for it. So another good example of that, I was talking to Mike Young, and Mike Young is an amazing exploration diver who does these crazy, crazy cave dives. He was the last person to dive Blue Hole Bridge or Blue Hole dive site in New Mexico. There's a cave there that goes very, very deep, and it's very, very dangerous. He went with a buddy that did some really dumb stuff and ended up dying in the process. And as I was talking and asking Mike about this dive, he said there were 3 separate times he was sure he was a goner. 3 separate times. He's 500 feet deep in a cave that there were several places he had to squeeze through by taking his tanks off to get through the restrictions. 3 separate times he thought he was dead. And I asked him, I says, Mike, tell me about that. What did you do? He says, here's the thing I realized. As you read the accident reports on dives, he says there's always a point in that they say in the accident, if they just done this, they would have survived. If they just done that, they would have survived. He says, each time that happened, he says, I stopped. I breathed, and then I thought. And my thought was, I'm not taking one more step, one more movement, one more anything, unless it gets me closer to safety and closer to saving my life. I'm going to do that thing. So stop, breathe, think. What have I prepared for? What can I do? What can I get that's going to make me safe? So that's probably enough on that. But those are some of the biggest keys I can think of as well. So let's see. I don't think we need to go over equalizing.
Ben, just on that point,
yes, sir.
In my experience, like repetition is a big part of that too. We talk about planning, but we also talk about talking about, and we talk about this over and over again. There's a lot of repetition in these classes, and that's what I noticed when I started going through it. But the first time I had an issue at 60, 70 feet in Ryrie, like 40th dive, I instantly forgot all the times we talked about that. And like that repetition actually is part of what helps drill it in so that when it does finally happen to you, you're not thinking about it for the first time in 3 months at that point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So overall, that's some of the keys is mentally prepare yourself. The other part about that is that I haven't brought up yet, and that Caleb made me think of, is that we don't just suddenly jump in. Jamie, you and I are not going to go do our first dive to 100. You're certified to 130 feet. You notice that our first dive is not 130 feet. Mm-hmm. So I was talking to John Dalla Zuana. He is part of a group called the Wet Mules. And their big thing with Dr. Harrison, they go out and they dive these really big caves. And in fact, they were the group that did the hydrogen dive at 900 feet in this cave in New Zealand.
So he also did the Thai caves, didn't he?
He did. He was the anesthesiologist.
Mm-hmm.
So I was talking to John, and John's amazing. He reminds me a lot of Mickey in terms of safety. He's very conservative, but very brave as well. And what I didn't realize when they did that cave to 900 feet. I know they'd done it once before where they got to 860 feet. But what I didn't realize is they've been diving that cave for 20 years.
Wow.
The interesting part about that is every year they expand and go 20 meters deeper. Or farther, not deeper, but farther in. They have explored that cave 20 meters at a time. And the way they're safe on that is they've done to this point so many times, and then they push it just a little bit more. They don't go for the deep. They don't say, I wonder what the end of the cave looks like. Let's go find out. They do it a little at a time. They build up a little at a time. So as you do this deep diving, I encourage you that your first trip out, first dive of the day, don't try and figure out what your new limit is. Oh, I can go at 130 feet. I should do 130 feet. No, please don't do that. I can even tell you with my tech diving, I don't do that. I haven't at this point. It's been a month since I've gotten to a nice deep level, and it'll be probably 2 months before I get back to 130, 140, 150 feet. My first dive out the gate after 3 months will not be a 150 foot dive. another friend of ours, Becky Kagan Scott, is amazing, 5-time Emmy award-winning videographer, photographer. She says every spring when the ice comes off, where she can start diving in the lakes, she takes time and goes to a quarry in her dry suit and relearns her dry suit. She starts off and she does medium dives, little deeper, little deeper, little deeper. She doesn't just experience very 10,000 diver, right? She doesn't just jump into it, right? So I encourage you, build your depth, build your time, build your experience one step at a time. I promise you, absolutely guarantee you 100 times that the ocean will be there tomorrow. The river will be there tomorrow. Climate change be damned. The ocean will be there tomorrow. So you don't have to see the whole damn ocean in one dive. Take your time. So build your experience. So let's talk about diving maladies, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly and get to the most important. Decompression sickness, I think we've already kind of covered. That's the basic idea of that. We're going to talk a little bit about air embolisms, pneumothoraxes, metacymal emphysema, and subcutaneous emphysema as well. All those are basic. Everything but DCS, those are overexpansion injuries. They're effects of pressure of overexpansion. And as we kind of go through this, they're pretty simple things. Air embolisms, or AGEs, air gas embolisms, are the most dangerous of those. And what that is it's a lot like DCS, but with oxygen instead. It's a different gas. And what happens is as I overexpand, I basically hold my breath or get into a sudden hit situation, gas will escape the venous system in some way, or the lungs, and get into the bloodstream and grow large. And just like DCS, an AGE can get stuck in different places, into my arms, causing me to lose feeling in my arms, in my neck, in my brain, and even worse in my brain. And when it starts getting into my brain, bad things happen. Simplest way: slow ascents, slow descents. Breathe continuously. Never, ever hold your freaking breath. A pneumothorax. What do you think a pneumothorax is? Have you heard that time before?
Yeah.
Okay. So pneumothorax is what then?
It's where there's you get air between the visceral and parietal pleura in your lungs, and you're not able to expand as you normally would.
Yeah, actually, it's more in your neck, but that's mediastinal. Mediastinal is in the chest cavity. Pneumothorax is in the throat. They both present around the neck and the lips mostly, but mediastinal is in the chest, and then subcutaneous is under the skin.
Okay.
Yep. So in the right areas. So overall, I think we kind of.
I thought the pneumothorax is the one in the movies that they like shove the thing in between the
Yeah.
ribs.
If it's like a pneumothorax, yeah, you go. It's a
Absolutely.
So, but then you said the mediastinal is more in the chest.
Mediastinal cavity is the chest.
Between by the heart.
It's where the lungs get pushed off to one side because there's too much gas in the chest. I think I'm more interested in getting past those because they're extremely rare overall, and getting into the more important things like how these happen. Overall, the biggest thing to be worried about is the terrible twos. The terrible twos are pretty straightforward. You avoid all these by not going too deep, staying too long, or ascending too fast. So make sure your descents and your ascents are slow. Take your time. Don't stay past the amount of time that you're supposed to stay, and don't go deeper than what you're qualified for or you're comfortable going. Take your time going to that depth. Don't make your first dive to 130 feet. Start your first dive at 99 feet. Maybe the next day go to 110 feet. Get used to that as well so that you understand that process. The other thing to be aware of is we start to go into deeper and deeper. We're starting to get into something called nitrogen narcosis. That's a real fun one. And there's a lot of different ideas about what causes nitrogen narcosis. Basically, it's nitrogen creates a narcotic effect in the brain and doesn't allow the neurons basically to connect overall. Interestingly enough, the signs and symptoms of nitrogen narcosis are a feeling of relaxation, lightheadedness, euphoria, slowed response. And I'm going to just put this on the screen so you can read them as well. I want you to be able to see these and understand them. Fixation on ideas, time distortion. I'm sure at this point you must have seen somebody that's narked out, that's on a narcotic of some kind. Act a little goofy, right?
Yeah.
Confusion, semi-conscious, distorted memory, decreased conceptual reasoning, hallucinations, both auditory and visual, paranoia. All these are definitely signs and symptoms of narcosis or a narcotic effect, right? Pretty basic stuff as we're going to go through this. And there's a lot of different thought processes. After 60 feet, nitrogen becomes narcotic. At 100 feet, it becomes more so, and it's equal to 1 martini on an empty stomach for every 50 feet thereafter. So it becomes very, very narcotic as we got to go through that process. The predisposing factors for this: carbon dioxide buildup, rapid descent, cold, certain drugs and medication, limited visibility and darkness, loss of orientation, high air gas consumption, inexperience at depths below 60 feet, over task loading, lack of sleep, exertion, psychological outlook being bleak, expecting narcosis to be worse than it actually is, anxiety, time pressure, and fatigue. A lot of mental factors kick in to create nitrogen narcosis as well. And they help add to the idea of nitrogen narcosis. But I want to kind of go into a little different subject that makes nitrogen narcosis make a little more sense. Because the funny thing is a lot of times when people are having a narcotic effect, they're actually not having the narcotic effect that they think they're having. So gas density is, did you know, a gas density of 6 grams per liter is equivalent to diving nitrox 32 at 110 feet or 34 meters, or Trimix 1835. Now, significant increases in the amount of it also causes significant increases the amount of CO2 retention dramatically, resulting in test subjects experiencing problems at 3 times greater the rate of at just 1 gram per liter less. So I just added these slides, so I'm trying to get them in the correct order. So overall, as we get deeper, the gas density gets much, much thicker. And so the gas we're breathing has a definite weight. And I apologize, I've just added these slides in the last few days, so I'm starting getting them in the right order. So as we start looking at the gas density, it's measured the mass per volume unit and measured in grams per liter. And a high gas density means that a given volume of gas weighs more and takes more effort to move, resulting in increased work of breathing. An increased gas density also skews the pressure gradient between breathe and arterial CO2, resulting in further decreased CO2 off-gassing and efficiency, and it results in recurring complications as well. So at the surface, here's what the gas weight of everything weighs. Hydrogen weighs 0.09 grams per liter. Helium is 0.179. Nitrogen is 1.25 grams per liter. Oxygen is 1.428 grams per liter, where the air we're breathing is 1.293. And real quickly, if we know that the gas that we're breathing is 1.293 grams per liter, we can simply multiply that by the atmospheric pressure. What we've determined through studies is that the maximum gas density we should breathe is 5.2 grams per liter, with a maximum hard stop limit of 6.2 grams per liter. Now, as we start going through that process, now we can go back over this slide. This makes a lot more sense. So a gas density of 6 grams per liter is the equivalent of nitrox 32 at 110 feet. We're way past our 5.2 grams per liter. And at 6 grams per liter, that really results in divers experience problems at a rate of 3 times that of using a gas even 1 gram per liter less.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mm.
So I apologize. My slides are still a little out of order, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
So one of the things we can do is we can minimize our work of breathing by improving our fitness and adding helium to reduce nitrogen narcosis and the work of breathing. So I need to take that slide completely out because we don't need to be talking about helium at all at this point. So I apologize. I added a few extra slides
This
that I
is
should.
a very advanced deep diving class, Ben.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So how do you think gas density would affect the work of breathing and how we breathe?
Just how difficult it is to push, or that resistance that you have to kind of fight against.
Absolutely.
And then you burn more oxygen in the process, or air in the process of trying to breathe. And it's kind of a positive feedback.
Absolutely. And so it definitely increases the carbon dioxide buildup considerably. And because we're not able to exchange the gas as easily in the dynamic of what we're breathing. So as we start getting deeper and moving past that 5.2 grams per liter, it immediately starts increasing our work of breathing considerably. If we're starting to build up our work of breathing considerably, we're starting to build up hypercapnia because we're not able to exchange that CO2. Now, hypercapnia is when you have a high level of carbon dioxide in your blood. Carbon dioxide is the waste product that your body gets rid of when you exhale. And if you can't get rid of it, it can build up in the blood considerably. Now, where I wanted to get with this, and I added a little too much to this slide, I took those out, is in hypercapnia, here's the signs and symptoms of hypercapnia: shortness of breath, headaches, disorientation, confusion, paranoia, anxiety, lightheadedness, euphoria, slowed response, a feeling of well-being, increased judgmental errors, deterioration of fine dexterity, fixation ideas, time distortion, deterioration of multitask reasoning, numbness, tingling, sleepiness, inability to remember parts of the dive, semi-consciousness, distorted memory of the dive, decreased conceptual reasoning. Let's do a comparison, though.
I know.
Hypercapnia versus narcosis. On each side, I underlined the one thing that wasn't on the other side. In hypercapnia, we have shortness of breath. In narcosis, we have a feeling of relaxation, visual and auditory hallucinations. Do you think narcosis and hypercapnia could be confused?
Yeah, and like O2 toxicity too. Like they're all like very vague and like something's wrong.
Absolutely. So as we start moving past that 100-foot mark, the weight of the gas is going to increase considerably. So let's do some quick math. If we're at 99 feet, which is 4 atmospheres, what is the weight of the gas? So simply enough, we can multiply 4 times 1.293. Our gas weight at 100 feet is 5.172 grams per liter. The maximum density of the gas we should be breathing is 5.2 grams per liter with an absolute viable max of 6.2 grams per liter. But 5.2 grams per liter should be the point where we stop. The gas density has increased to the point where we're starting to build up hypercapnia considerably. And I can absolutely tell you it, doing some of the deep dives on air that I've done at 128 feet, I've absolutely had hypercapnia buildup. It's not hard. I dive a lot, and I dive to that depth a lot. And the thing that saved me when I had a hypercapnia hit was practice and skill. I built up to that. I knew what it felt like. I knew what I needed to do, and I'd made my preparation prior to the dive. And I'll be honest, when it happened to me, I had other divers that I was leading. I was paranoid. I was anxious. I had a strong feeling that I was going to kill all my divers. Absolutely. I could feel that. I could feel that thought coming in. But the best way to not have a problem to fix a problem is not have it in the first place. I had a plan. I had a slate. This is what we're doing. I talked to my divers ahead of time. This is what we're doing. We had a gas plan. This is how much gas we're going to have. This is how much gas we're going to have ahead of time. So as we went through this process, we made a plan, and the best way to avoid a problem is not to have it at all. So it absolutely happens. The other piece that helped me is I had experienced hypercapnia prior to that. I knew what it felt like, and I was able to be more resistant to it because I knew it. I'd practiced up to that point. I didn't just, my first dive of the year wasn't to 130 feet. I'd done a lot of dives that year to 130 or beyond. So
your first dive to 140 wasn't with other divers.
Yes. So be aware, hypercapnia and narcosis are absolutely positively things that happen as you go deeper. Be aware, if you start feeling anxious, paranoid, lightheaded, the great thing about the human body, in my opinion, through this whole process is that if you pay attention to it, it will tell you everything you need to know. If something doesn't feel right, your body is trying to say, hey, something ain't right. If you feel tingling, numbness, if you all of a sudden can't do simple things. I had a situation where I got pretty severe hypothermia. I was trying to do math at 50 feet. We were in 33 degree water, very cold. I was cold, and I knew I was getting hypothermic, and I couldn't do the simple math of how long will it take me to surface from 50 feet with a 3-minute safety stop. I couldn't do it.
He didn't tell me he was cold.
I couldn't do the math, but luckily I had a plan. I followed the computer. I did my slow ascent based off on the computer. I did my safety stop based upon the computer. I surfaced, got back to shore. But absolutely, when you start feeling the point when I realized, wait a minute, I can't do simple math, time to end the dive. And that's one of the things I do for me, as I'm constantly checking my mental ability through the process. Can I do the math? And that's a simple one. When we do our deep dive, I will time you on the surface with some math problems, and I'll time you at depths on those same simple math problems. You'll be surprised how much longer it will take you at depth to do the same math problems. It's a very cool thing to be able to do that. If you get fixated on things, but pay attention to your body. This is the most self-aware sport that I could possibly think of. I played a lot of sports in my life, and I've done a lot of dangerous, dumb stuff. I've skydived. I've played football. I boxed all through college. I've done a lot of dumb things and a lot of wild sports. But as far as I'm aware, this is the most self-aware sport I've ever been a part of. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Be aware and be in tune with yourself to know, is everything okay? Am I going through a lot of gas? What's going on? Am I feeling paranoid about something? Am I feeling scared about something? Fear is absolutely a great indicator of you not being where you should be, especially in diving. Diving is a dangerous sport, so be aware of that. Make sense? I love this slide. This is a new slide for this presentation. The difference between narcosis and hypercapnia.
Yeah.
So
I think you should rearrange them so that they're in the same order.
Yep. Absolutely.
Like when he was putting this together earlier today, he's like, look, the only one that's different is the shortness of breath. And I'm sitting back here going, well, that'd be a lot easier to see if they were.
You're giving me hypercapnia just trying to figure out the list.
Absolutely.
She's got good ideas.
Absolutely. So gas density is a new one for this presentation. So just be aware that it's definitely something to be aware of. And as we kind of look at this dynamic, we're teaching you deep diving. The statistics very simple. Dives with less than 6 grams per liter gas density had a less than a 10% failure rate. Dives with more than 6 grams per liter immediately jumped, and the failure rate increased more than 40%. That's fairly significant. Keep your gas density low. And
what defines a failure?
There's a lot of anything that where they had to abort the dive, or there was a massive problem of error. But if you start doing the math on this, it gets really, really interesting really quickly. That is for sure. Give me a second. Let's pull up the math. I've got a spreadsheet on this. Let's see. Take me a second here.
I was saying the density is not really something we can control unless we're talking like how deep we are, or if we're like introducing helium or something, right?
Absolutely. So let's take a look at that. Let me remove.
And this is why we don't just stop at deep diving. Next summer I'm hoping to get my helium certification if Ben has time.
There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at this for a moment. So we're planning out a dive, breathing 21% air. That means that our max at 5.2 is 4 atmospheres. So 4 times 33 is what?
132.
4 atmospheres is how deep?
4 times 33, 132.
Nope, you got to subtract 1 for the surface.
Subtract 1 for the surface. So it's just about, in that case, it's 99 feet.
Yes, 99 feet. So 4.81 on air is how deep? Is it 125?
Probably.
Yes, it is. So
Yes.
on air,
I just hadn't.
6.2 grams per liter is 125 feet.
So is that part of what goes into the dive tables?
No. Gas density has nothing to do with dive tables, unfortunately. So as we look at this, 6.2 grams per liter is our absolute max is 125 feet. So doing 130 feet on air tells us very quickly that we're going past the recommended amount of gas density we need to be a part of. But what about nitrox? Thanks, Caleb, for bringing that up. That's a good point. What if we're diving 28% nitrox? Which means how much we're breathing. What's that? Sorry, typo there. We're breathing 72% nitrogen. What did that do to us? That shallowed us up, didn't it? So if we're breathing 28% nitrox at 6.2 grams per liter, that's 124 feet. So as we add nitrox to the blend, we actually shallow ourselves up based upon the gas density because oxygen is heavier than nitrogen. Did you notice that? So as I reduce nitrogen, I increase the weight of the gas by the oxygen content. Does that make sense?
Are you sure it doesn't take into account at all?
It doesn't. It doesn't take it into account at all. That's the problem. In the last 3 years, this is the information that's come out. So it doesn't take the dive tables don't take the gas density into account at all. It has nothing to do with gas density at all, unfortunately. So just be aware as you add
mod. So on that, Ben, the mod for 28% nitrox is 132 feet.
Mm-hmm.
That's the 1.4 mod. But the density at 132 feet at 28% nitrox is actually, what would that be? Put in the depth of
124. The mod for gas density would be 124 feet max.
So technically, the mod that you get in your SSI dive table is telling you can go lower than you probably really should be.
Yes, the dive tables and the mod doesn't take into account the gas density. So be aware as you're getting to that deeper depth, and you start doing 130 feet on nitrox, 28%, which is absolutely within the mod. You're going past 6.2 grams per liter. You're absolutely getting into the point where you're going to start building up hypercapnia and nitronarcosis in that dynamic because you're going past the gas density maximum depth. You're already in the danger zone as it is. Anything past 5.2, you're starting to build up too much gas density as it is. 6.2 being the absolute max. Makes sense?
Do our dive computers compensate for like all this consideration, or
if a dive computer does not take into account, some dive computers will tell you what the gas density is, but in terms of giving you a mod for the gas density, most dive computers do not until you get into some hardcore technical features. This is something fairly new and is something that is not talked about nearly enough in diving. Gas density is a really recent idea in gas. Now let's put it into perspective and let's put a scenario out there. You're a nurse, so you have a 60-year-old female, slightly overweight. She's 5'5" and 165 pounds. Certainly not fat, right? But she's overweight, right?
not for an American, yeah.
Yeah. She's overweight. She works in an office and she has very low physical activity. Okay. That's our patient. Non-smoker. We'll even make her a little healthier, right? But not the healthiest person in the world. She's been certified for the last 20 years and she's done about 100 dives in the last 20 years. Goes to a local dive shop and signs up for a dive trip, finds out they're going to be doing some deep dives on this dive and some night dives. So in that week before the dive trip, they take her out, and in 3 days they get her nitrox certified, deep dive certified, and night dive certified in those 3 days. And they take her to some Central American country, and they decide that they're going to do 3 days with dive 1 in each day going to be to 100 feet. And on day 3, they're going to take her to 130 feet.
I'm a little
On
concerned.
28% nitrox. Now, in this particular case, she has a cardiac event. They bring her to surface after this cardiac event. What caused the cardiac event?
Could be, I mean, a lot of things, but like oxygen, like demand versus oxygen supply mismatch.
Absolutely. So demand versus oxygen supply, could that be attributed to gas density? All of a sudden, she's breathing 6.2 grams per liter, building up a lot of hypercapnia, causing a tremendous amount of workload on her cardiovascular system. Is that a problem?
Yeah.
So would it be advisable to send a 60-year-old woman out to the track to run 3 5-mile laps in one day?
No.
Probably not, right? Build up to it.
Yeah.
So as you got to go through this, be aware, gas density is a huge thing.
That's
It's
interesting.
not something that's talked about at all in your book, anywhere at all in your book. It's not
Yet.
part of the dive table.
We're going to get it in there, Ben. You will.
I'm working on it, actually. I recently wrote an article for Dan. So be aware, it's coming. It's just not there yet. Let's see. Let me check something real quick. All right. Okay. I bumped the table and disconnected my mic. So there we go. I just want to make sure you can still hear me. So as you got to be aware, just be aware of that. So I think that's enough of that subject. Just be aware, build up to them. And as you're going to those deep depths, you're going to start building up a lot of hypercapnia. All right. Let's jump back into share my screen again, because apparently you guys like the pictures. Let's see.
Does the shear water, Ben, include any gas density?
Yes.
In a real-time dive?
In a real-time dive, yes.
Okay, cool. Because I thought it did. I didn't, and I haven't researched the other ones. So you have to tell me if some of the other ones.
It's one of the things I keep up on my screen at all times. I keep up. In fact, I keep up delta. I keep up the delta and the gas density at all times on my shear water.
Perfect. Is that viewable on the video we made? I was pulling that up earlier.
Should be. I can check later.
I'll find it here.
But the gas density should
Go
be
ahead.
up.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries. So dive computers for your level of the game. The basic history of dive computers they were really conceptualized in the 60s with the idea that they were for the military. They were originally designed by Scripps Institute and Naval Experimental Diving Unit. And the idea is how do we save our frogmen so they can stay down longer and have less problems, get bent less. Simple problem. The problem at the time is they didn't have the ability to make them small enough to be able to be accurate. So when they finally started coming out in the early 70s, they were classified. Dive computers were actually top secret. It wasn't until about the mid 70s we started getting the wisdom and the first dive computers out for recreational use. Now their intended use is pretty basic. The idea is to, with an algorithm, measure the amount of nitrogen uptake and off gas in your system. That's really what it does. It's based upon one of several different algorithms, the primary one being Buhlmann 16C, to measure on a basic algorithm based upon the depth and time of my dive, how much nitrogen my body has absorbed and how my body is off-gassing that nitrogen. That's its basic use. Now, they've come a long way. Now they've got cool things like on this particular one, this is Asunto. They've got dive time, how much longer I have on my deep compression limit, what is basic, but it also can monitor your tank pressure, current depth, how long your safety stop should be, my current ascent rate, my overall water temperature, how cold the water is, and it can do things like that. It does have some specific limitations, though. Dive computers are limited based upon the algorithm of the least common denominator. So it may be you, it may be not. Some days it may be you, but it's limited to that idea. They're limited to a lot of them to exactness of altitude. Altitude definitely has an effect on a dive computer. Some dive computers handle it much better than others. But it also doesn't take into account cold. Now, as you might guess, cold has a lot of effects on a diver overall. As the water and the air gets colder, you absorb nitrogen into your system much more quickly. That's based on Henry's law. So the amount of gas dissolves in a liquid is based upon agitation and temperature. The colder a gas gets, the more it will absorb into a liquid and into a tissue. So dive computers can't take into account that coldness as well. So be aware there are some definite key limitations to them as well. The other limitation to them as well is they're designed to work on a positive profile. And what that means is that you want to do your deepest dive first. Reverse profiling is where you go out and you do a shallow dive and then a deep dive. The problem is the algorithms aren't designed to be able to work in a reverse profile where you do a deeper dive first. So you always want to do that deep dive first and then work shallower and shallower so that you're not working on what's called a reverse profile. So in multi-level diving, we always start deepest and work our way to shallower. That way the algorithms are able to keep up with us. Make sense?
Yep.
The nice thing with dive computers as well is they're really designed to be able to monitor a multi-level dive though, because the problem is the dive tables is they're designed in a pure box format with the idea that it says I'm basically dropping to whatever depth. I'm staying at that exact depth for a period of time, and I'm ascending directly after the depth. That's how the dive tables are written and put together. It says basically that I'm going to 80 feet, and I can stay there for 30 minutes. Jamie, you haven't done a lot of dives, but have you ever descended immediately within a tenth of a second to your exact depth, stayed at that exact depth for a period of time, and then ascended directly immediately after the dive?
Not yet. I'm not that. No, not yet.
Nobody does. No dive looks like that. They all are in a gradient file, right? And you go a little bit down, you go a little bit up, you go a little bit down, you go a little bit up, you go a little bit down, you go a little bit up, and then eventually you gradient your way up. So the nice thing with a dive computer is that it'll take into account the time spent at shallower depths. So as we look at it, it'll take into account the time spent at this depth, and working my way up. Whereas the dive tables are designed to be able to work in a box, the dive computer will be able to work at a varied gradient, varied depths as well. I'll give you credit for that, giving you ability to spend less time at depth, or more time at depth. I'm sorry, overall. And so Caleb's got a video here. You give you an idea of exactly what some dive computers will look like and what some dive computers don't. Yep, as you look at this computer, the shear water, and you can see DEN, that's my gas density as well. So it gives you an idea to see what different computers look like at different depths. This one's telling you I'm at 97 feet. I've been down for 27 minutes. I've got 2005 PSI in one tank and 1955 PSI in another tank. This computer is showing you a nice compass up here, as well as it's showing you my partial pressure of gas that I'm currently breathing as well. So it gives you different computers will give you different pieces of information. In this particular case, I'm doing a decompression dive. And so this one's telling you that I now have a ceiling of so far. Caleb, will you slip forward to the safety stop portion?
Sure. Safety stop.
That's a cool little comparison.
Yeah, it's for my channel. I'll send you over the video. It's a fun video to watch.
Nerd.
And stole my Apple Watch for this one.
Yep.
Oh, no.
I think Caleb's going to send that over to you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'll drop it in. Yeah. You can see the shear water says clear. So you like the shear water says you've been doing a safety stop now for 6 minutes and 35
Will you back
seconds.
up about 5 minutes, please?
Sure. Let's try that. Is that far enough? Maybe this one.
I think it's still thinking on you. Go forward 3 minutes, please.
Okay.
Remember, this is sped up 300% too. So as you do your 3
that's
minutes,
right. That's why I keep missing this.
Yeah, the video sped up 300 to 400%.
Okay. Back that
So a
up
little farther ahead,
again.
please.
Oh, farther ahead.
A little bit more.
Okay, right there.
So let's give you a good idea what the computers look like.
Yeah.
So you can see this one keeps popping up to safety stop. Let's see.
Yeah,
a
the
little
Apple
farther
Watch
ahead.
is rather pervasive in that. The Apple Watch gives you basically your
There we
basic
go.
information, whereas
So there we
everything
go.
else
You can
is-
see this one's got a safety
Yeah.
stop. This one's got a safety stop coming up as well. So you can see that they're popping up, and the Suunto has a safety stop. So most of your computers will have a safety stop dynamic on it. This is a Shearwater. It's got 2 minutes of safety stop. That it counts down, so you can do as long a safety stop as you want. This one's been a safety stop for 2 minutes and 35 seconds at this point. So it gives you a better idea where you're at. This one's got 48. This one counts down. This one's got 41 seconds left in safety stop as well. So yeah, Caleb will send you that video. It's kind of fun to watch. It's all the way through Deco with 5 different computers. That's
another reason why we often dive more than one computer too. Gives you different information.
Apex. This is an Apex DSX. This is a Shearwater Perdix. This is an Apple Watch. That's a Garmin Mark II-i, and that's the Suunto Black. The shop sells the ones on the end, the far left and far right. So there you go. Pull that off. So it's nice. It gives you a lot of really good information overall. So overall, you've got a good idea of dive planning as well. As you start getting into this dive planning as well, just make sure to beware that if something happens and you do spend too long down, make sure to if you go into that process, to give yourself the extra time. Should you exceed the NDL time by 5 minutes on any dive, it's recommended that you ascend to your 15-foot safety stop and spend 10 minutes there or longer if your air supply allows. If you exceed that by 5 minutes, but not more than 10 minutes, you should try and spend 20 minutes at your safety stop. And if you exceed it by anything longer than that, stay as long as you can at the safety stop. But try not with this, you're not trained to exceed the no decompression limits. So make sure you're staying within your computer, within your training, and within your ability as well. Make sense?
Yep.
That's what I've got for presentation. What questions do you have?
I just want to go dive now. I'm like, let's go.
Absolutely.
I feel like it's like in the application when I actually start doing it that I'm like I'm thinking through. I'm like, oh, like in theory I thought I knew what I was doing, but it's like the actual application. So I can't think of I guess one weird question. Do you know why we consume more oxygen in colder water? Like I was gonna Google that later, but I don't know if you have to.
Your body's working harder to stay warm is one reason. So as your body has to work harder, your heart will beat faster because you got what ends up happening is vasoconstriction is happening. So it's causing your heart to work harder to pump the blood out to your extremities. So as your body has to work harder to do what it normally does, partially because of vasoconstriction, partially because your body's trying to stay warm.
Okay.
Gas is also more dense as well. So you'll go through a lot more gas because if gas is denser because it's colder, it's smaller molecules. So there's multiple reasons for that.
I guess that makes sense. I think I was thinking like sometimes in the hospital, if patients come in after they've like arrested or whatever, we'll cool them on purpose, like drop their body temperature. But that's more about like preserving neurological function and stuff.
Absolutely. Slowing blood flow and absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. But as you're trying to accomplish the same thing, if you're just laying still and getting cool to preserve neurological function, it's not the same idea. You're not having to work. If they were cold and having to work, the heart would have to pump a lot more blood to make things happen, to move gas around in the body.
That makes sense because they'll if they start shivering, we purposely will paralyze them so they don't consume as much oxygen. Okay, thought clicking, guys. Let's go.
There you go. Absolutely.
I mean, I notice for me when I dive cold, I just swim harder and faster because I'm trying to stay warm. So I just subconsciously start moving more, which of course increases my breathing rate.
Yep, more work, but cold, and the density of gases. So you have several reasons. I mean, your body's working harder to accomplish the same mission because of, as cold happens, vasoconstriction occurs, but your body is working harder to stay warm as well. And so as it's working harder to stay warm, you've got that issue as well. So there's several reasons why you'd go through more gas when it's cold.
That makes sense.
It's it's not just one easy factor. What else?
I think that was one of the main ones I was thinking about. But I know when we actually go to dive, I'll have more questions. So.
Now, some of the things, let's talk about the dives we're going to do. So one of the requirements is we have to launch an SMB.
Okay.
And to launch an SMB, you have to have an SMB. To launch an SMB, you also need a reel or a spool. So the rules of the spool are pretty simple. You want to have a spool that will contain 1.5 times the length of the maximum depth of your dive.
Okay.
Simple enough. If you buy an SMB and a spool combination at the shop, do it while I'm there, and I'll set it up for you as well. I've got a bend mod for that that has become pretty popular and is a nice way to set them up. And I'm happy to do that for you. That will make your life a lot easier. I don't think I have one here, but I do. I have one that I set up for somebody else. It was just a piece of crap. But one of the things I do is I add a bungee to it. This is not mine. I wouldn't use this in a bet, but I add some bungees to them so that the nice thing is once you get that bungee on there and you bungee it across, and you have your bungee, it can't come undone.
Okay, yeah, I think I've seen that actually.
And I do the same thing to your SMB as well. I'll add some bungees to them so that it doesn't come. It's easier to use underwater. So you might be asking, how do you launch an SMB? That's a good question, Jamie. I'm glad you asked.
Thank you.
So the process of launching SMB is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to reach back and we're going to find our SMB. Okay. Once we found our SMB, we're going to separate the reel from it and from the SMB. And we're going to make sure if there is a clip on it, we unclip it. Yours is going to have a permanent clip on it. So we get the SMB and the reel apart. They're connected, but they're apart so that they're two separate entities. Once I get them apart, I'm going to unroll my SMB. So my SMB is completely open and ready to go. From that point, I'm going to take the bungee off my reel and I'm going to hold it stiffly in my right hand, ready to go. I'm going to stick 2 thumbs into the bottom of my SMB. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to turn my head to the right, and I'm going to put the SMB above the exhaust vent of my second stage that I'm currently breathing on, and I'm going to breathe normally. The exhaust is going to come out and it'll go into the vent, the bottom side of the SMB. And I'm going to keep doing that until I feel a tug, a tension from the SMB. Once I feel that tension, I don't want it to pull me. I want it tense, right? Once I feel that tension, I'm going to move it away. I'm going to take my SMB, my reel in my right hand, and I'm going to let the SMB go and let it spin openly. Easy, easy peasy, just like that. Now, I will not teach how to launch an SMB by taking a regulator out of your mouth or using a free-flowing regulator ever with you. The reason being is if we're at depth, I don't want you taking your primary air source out of your mouth and using and blowing anything up. All it does is we're at depth. If there's a problem and you sneeze or cough or yawn or whatever reason, you have a panic, you have more likelihood of ingesting air. I have a bigger problem saving you if we're at 130 feet than I do at 10 feet, right? So we're adding a level of danger that I don't want to be a part of. Don't take your regulator in your mouth. I don't teach using your safety second either because we're at depth. It's going to be colder. Nikki and I have had that happen where we've used the safety second to fill the SMB and it go to free flow because it was coming out colder. I also don't teach disassembling anything underwater. Why would you want to disassemble your gear underwater to fill your SMB and then have to reassemble it? The other key part about that is if I have to take my first stage out of my mouth, I'm holding my breath. What's the number one rule of scuba?
Breathe continuously.
Always breathe. If I take it out, I'm all of a sudden changing my buoyancy. If I just put it over and I'm just breathing normally, I'm not changing my buoyancy at all. I'm just breathing normally. So don't take anything out of your mouth. Don't disassemble anything, and don't use your safety second. Just use the gas that's already coming out of your. It's kind of like Chris Tucker. Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Yes. Just use the gas that's coming out of your mouth. It's already coming out, right? It's, just do that naturally. And once you launch your SMB to the point, hold on to it and keep tension on the line. It's very important to keep tension on the line. The great thing is as you ascend, you roll it up, keep tension. We keep tension in the line for a couple reasons. The main reason is if you don't keep tension, it will absolutely wrap around both of your fins, around your head, and around your arm. Or even worse, it'll wrap around your dive buddy. It'll wrap around something, right? It's Murphy's law of loose lines. It'll wrap around something. Keep it tense. It just is a lot safer. The other nice thing about it is we get to our safety stop. If you've got it rolled up and nice and tense, and you stop at 15 feet, will you ever have to check your depth gauge again? No, you've got a line 15 feet to the surface. So use that to mark your safety stop, and you no longer have to worry about buoyancy. You can utilize that as a nice little balance point. And then once you get to surface, wind it the rest of the way up, put the bungee back around it, clip it to yourself, and then get on the dive boat. That will be a skill. We will
tell Ben that you got to practice launching an SMB in Belmont already. We'll just leave that part out.
It wasn't the smoothest thing I've ever done.
The thing about launching SMB is you need to practice it and practice it often.
Yeah.
I'm good at launching SMB because I launch an SMB regularly. That's why I'm good at launching SMB. It's not because I launched one time and had a problem. And I can tell you, I've had problems launching SMBs as well. The most famous one, let's see, I've got two. I got two stories about problems launching SMB where I hadn't practiced enough. We were in a tech class. Nikki and I were at 150 feet on a drift dive together, and it was funny. I had two SMBs and I had two reels, and on the dive boat, the instructor with us had said, "Hey, I always keep my SMB attached to my deco bottle. It was our third tank, right?" He says it's nice and easy. Just grab it. It's just right there. And I'm like, "All right, well, he's done like 10,000 dives, and I've got 500 dives, so I'll try his way. Okay, we'll give it a go." And so I did. Well, we got down to 150 feet, Nikki and I together, and we did. One of our skills was to do a deco swap. So we had to switch deco bottles. Well, it came time for us to go to our next level and to launch our SMBs, and we hadn't switched our tanks back. So I grabbed my second SMB to launch it, and the spool got tangled. And my finger got stuck in the spool, and it started dragging me. We're at 150 feet. It dragged me up to 90 feet like that. We were in about a 4-knot current, but the problem is currents don't always go the same direction. This one actually went this way and bent at a 90 degrees. Well, as you might imagine, because I was 50 feet ahead and 50 feet above Nikki, they took the left current. I took the straight current.
Oh, gosh.
So now we're in the middle of the ocean. They dumped Lake Okeechobee, and there was only 50 feet of viz. And so they'd gone the other way, and there was no way I was getting back to them. So I was by myself, running my deco profile by myself. So I reached down I was like, and what I'd done is, because I'd gotten caught in the reel, I took my knife and I cut the spool and I let the SMB go. I was like, screw that SMB. I would rather be alive than have the SMB. No problem. So I went to grab my second SMB, and it was on Nikki's tank. We hadn't switched back. So I was without an SMB. Luckily, I happened to come across another diver that was with us that was doing rebreather diving, and he launched an SMB for us in this heavy current. So it worked out well. And then there was another time we were at I forget, we were like 130, 140 feet together. And I was running a reel, a nice big reel, and I'd put out too much string on the reel, and I'd launched the SMB, and I'd overfilled the SMB a little bit, and it took off like a bat out of hell. That's why I say do it to just where it's tense, not to where it's full, because it will expand when it gets to the surface, right? But what happened with this too much line, the line had whipped around and tied around my wrist. Oh. And so it was dragging me to the surface. So I grabbed my knife and I cut it and let the SMB go, and I just launched my second SMB. I got that SMB back twice, though. By the way, so pro tip: write your name and phone number in 3-inch letters on your SMB. You'll get it back.
That's a good idea.
So absolutely. So the things I'm teaching you about SMB are things that I have learned through negative experiences. We never use a safety second because Nikki and I were in Yellowstone Lake, and she filled up the S&B to mark something for us, and she went to a full free flow. Took about 2 minutes to drain her whole tank.
It's a little more than that.
That's a bummer.
So the things we're teaching you are things we've learned through experience. So that's why we do the things we do. None of it's random. So what other questions do you have?
I think that's all I've got for now.
And we're still good.
What was that?
Still good to go for.
Sorry, it keeps breaking up right as
You
you're
broke
saying.
up, Ben.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. We're still good to go for February.
Yes, I'm excited.
All right, just a real quick recap tonight. JB, we talked a lot about deep diving. We did very little into night diving, which we'll go into a lot more on location. We talked a lot about things. We talked about lights, repair kits. We talked about we're going to do a SAC rate on location. We talked about flying after diving. We expounded upon the idea of the safety stop and doing a 1 minute safety stop at 20 feet and 4 minutes at 10 feet because it reduces the nitrogen profile quite a bit. We talked a little bit about overexpansion injuries, but I felt like you had a really good understanding of that already. We talked about gas density. We outlined the dangers of gas density and the correlation of gas density and nitrogen narcosis and how those two could be easily confused. We also talked about gas density in the idea that it's not currently discussed in the deep diving class or in the dive tables as well. We talked about cold quite a bit as well through this process, the intended uses of dive computers and planning as well. And the importance of how to avoid a problem is not to have it in the first place. But if we do have a problem, to stop, breathe, think, and then act. And the things we will think about are things that we pre-plan to the surface, as well as thinking about what action can we take that will get us one step closer to safety. So we went through a lot of that as well. We talked a little bit about decompression theory and as well. Jamie, what more questions do you have?
I think I'm good for tonight. I'll be thinking though.
Cool. I'm going to end the recording.